clamoring at the air as he shouted, "King of the Trident!" Sir Edmure chanted after him, "King of the Mountains and the Vale." One of the Vale Knights shouted, and then the entire hall erupted into chants of Rob's titles. Rob rolled up the parchment again. "Maester Viman has drawn a map, showing the borders we claim. You shall have a copy for the Queen. Lord Tywine must withdraw beyond these borders, and cease his raiding, burning, and pillage. The Queen Regent and her son shall make no claims to taxes, incomes, nor service from my people, and shall free my lords and knights from all oaths of fealty, vows, pledges, debts, and obligations owed to the Iron Throne and the houses Baratheon and Lannister. Additionally, the Lannisters shall deliver 10 highborn hostages, to be mutually agreed upon, as a pledge of peace. These I will treat as honored guests, according to their station. So long as the terms of this pact are abided with faithfully, I shall release 2 hostages every year, and return them safely to their families." Rob tossed the rolled parchment at the knight's feet. "There are the terms. If she meets them, I'll give her peace. If not," he whistled, and Grey Wind and Ghost moved forward snarling, "I will litter the south with Lannister dead, including her son." Sir Cleos was hesitant to respond. "King Joffrey is a Baratheon, your grace." Laughter went about the hall. Sir Edmure, the Great Jon and Theon laughed aloud, while quieter men like Lord Rickard, Benjen, the Blackfish and Jon simply smirked. "Oh, is he?" Rob inquired with a smile, spurring more laughter. "I'm afraid I've heard conflicting reports of late," Rob chided as laughter rose up again. Sir Cleos was confused and dumbstruck. Clearly, word of Stannis's letters that had spread throughout the 7 kingdoms had not reached the dungeons of Riverrun yet. Sir Cleos had gone the color of curdled milk. "The Queen shall hear your message, your grace." "Good," Rob said. "Sir Robin, see that he has a good meal and clean clothing. He's to ride at first light." "As you command, your grace," Sir Robin Roger replied. "Then we are done." The assembled knights and lords bannermen bent their knees as Rob turned to leave, Grey Wind at his heels. Oliver Free scrambled ahead to open the door. Rob was followed by his mother and his uncle Ed Muir. "You did well," Lady Catelyn told her son in the gallery that led from the rear of the hall, though that business with the wolves was japely more befitting a boy than a king. Rob scratched Grey Wind behind the ear. "Did you see the look on his face, mother?" he asked, smiling. Rob knew his mother would regard it as churlish, and while Rob did have fun with it, he knew what he was doing. It was primarily a matter of power and intimidation. The Queen would ask Sir Cleos to report all he knew of Rob when he arrived at the capital, and doubtless, he would make sure that the fear he felt was reiterated for Cersei. Rob lifted off his crown with both hands and gave it to Oliver. "Take this thing back to my bedchamber." "At once, your grace." The squire hurried off. Not all the lords and knights seemed pleased with your wish for peace. Many wish to see vengeance done for Jon Arryn and your father, and others have lost kinsmen in this war already, his uncle Ed Muir declared. "How can we talk of peace while the Lannisters spread like a pestilence over my father's domains, stealing his crops and slaughtering his people? I say again, we ought to be marching on Harrenhal." "We lack the strength," Rob said, though unhappily. "At least for now. Mance Rayder's host will reach Moat Cailin soon enough, another 40,000 men to join our ranks, along with thrice as many skin changers, an army of giants and a Scattersea cavalry of unicorns." Ed Muir persisted. "But your second northern host is still many leagues from us. Do we grow stronger sitting here waiting for them? Our host dwindles every day." "And whose doing is that?" Catelyn snapped at her brother. It had been at Ed Muir's insistence that Rob had given the River Lords leave to depart after his crowning, each to defend his own lands. Sir Mark Piper and Lord Cale Vance had been the first to go. Lord Jon Osbracken had followed, vowing to reclaim the burnt shell of his castle and bury his dead, and now Lord Jason Mallister had announced his intent to return to his seat at Seaguard, still mercifully untouched by the fighting. "You cannot ask my River Lords to remain idle while their fields are being pillaged and their people put to the sword," Sir Ed Muir said. "Nor do I expect them to," Rob interjected. "Each castle reclaimed by our River Lords is a victory for us. When their castles are refortified and the Lannister incursion has regressed, they will rejoin us." "And what if Queen Cersei accepts your peace terms? How will you maintain the loyalty of your lords if they think you weak for yielding your vengeance?" asked Ed Muir. Rob smirked and shook his head. His uncle was a good man but a bit brash and quick to thought. She won't, she can't. She's too paranoid, Joffrey's too greedy and Tywin's too prideful for any of them to agree to yield half of Westeros and fight with Robert's brothers over the remaining scraps. I knew from the beginning my terms would never be accepted. Even if I surrendered and bent the knee, Tywin or Joffrey would have had me executed for treason to make a point. These peace terms will at the very least show the realm I exhausted every peaceful option before going to war, and at the most, it will distract the Lannisters while Mace's host moves further south. Catelyn seemed shocked and appalled. So your demands of your sister's release was all a farce? Lady Catelyn asked. Cersei won't release Sansa and Arya, and you know that. If we want the girls back, we have to go down to King's Landing and get them. You are right that Cersei will never consent to trade your sisters for a pair of cousins, but it's her brother she'll want, as you know full well. It was true that Cersei's want for her brother became all the more prevalent after the arrival of Stannis's letter. Even if I was willing to trade the Kingslayer for the girls, Cersei would never accept the rest of my terms, Robb declared, folding his arms. Then make a separate bargain. Let the war rage on if it must, but trade Sir Jaime for your sisters, and when our hostages are exchanged, let the fighting continue. Robb shook his head. Jaime Lannister pushed Bran from the tower. He and his sister then sent a cutthroat to kill him in his sleep and almost killed you too. He killed Jory and the others and broke father's leg. He captured your brother and besieged this castle. Robb motioned to his uncle. And he killed Darin Hornwood and almost killed Lord Mormont too. He's Tywin Lannister's firstborn son and preferred heir, and Stannis's letter now shows us who he truly is to the Queen and to Joffrey. With his sword hand or without, he can still command Tywin's troops against us if he rejoins their army, and if the Kingsguard are as great as they say, he can still fight better than most men with his other hand. The Kingslayer's freedom will reinvigorate the morale of our enemies and challenge our own. As a free man, the Lannisters have a valuable commander returned to their side, and as free women, we will have the girls safe, but that is all. Robb pushed a fall of hair out of his eyes and gave a shake of the head. I might have been able to trade the Kingslayer for father, but not for the girls. Her voice was icy quiet. Girls are not important enough, are they? Robb made no answer, but in his pain-stricken heart, he knew it was true. Robb could think of no other points to make, no other convincing words that might sway his mother's view. With nothing but futility and argument awaiting Robb if he continued, the king decided he now had enough of the subject. Mother, are you certain you will not consent to go to the twins? You would be farther from the fighting. Bran and Rickon are all alone. Catelyn went cold and stern, studying Robb's face with suspicion. His mother clearly thought Robb's wish for her to return home was some kind of malevolent plot against her, but in truth, Robb wanted her safe. It was true Robb had grown weary of the amount of authority his mother assumed over him and how she seemed so desperate to protect her family she would have them all go to the Lannisters if it meant they could return to Winterfell in peace. Robb understood she meant well, but that was not the same as doing well. You could go with Theon. He leaves on the morrow. He'll help the Lannisters escort that lot of captives to Seaguard and then take ship for the Iron Islands. You could find a ship as well, and be back at Winterfell with a moon's turn if the winds are kind. My lord father has little enough time remaining him. So long as your grandfather lives, my place is at Riverrun with him. Robb did not doubt his mother's sincerity in her wish to remain by her father's side as his health dwindled, but she had also been using it as an excuse to stay by Robb's side. She wished to coddle and control him. She feared Robb to still be a foolish boy who would get himself or his sisters killed, and it terrified her. Robb cautioned her. I could command you to go. As king, I could. His words seemed to fall upon deaf ears as Catelyn changed the subject. I'll say again, I would sooner you sent someone else to Pike, and kept Theon close to you. Robb had decided to send Theon to his homeland of the Iron Islands to try and sway Balon Greyjoy to join them against their enemies. Stannis was a great mariner and tactician and commanded a powerful navy with experienced seafaring lords. The Lannisters had ships at Lannisport, and with the Reach sworn to Renly, he'd have ships from the Arbor and Old Town as well as ships from the Stormlands. Robb had a great land force but not much in the way of a navy. On the narrow sea, he might be able to cobble together a fleet with ships gathered from Maidenpool, Gulltown, Old Anchor, the Fingers and White Harbour, but on opposing coast, his naval power was limited mostly to Seaguard. The Iron Islands were no friends to the Lannisters or Baratheons. They followed the old gods like the Northerners, though over the centuries they had narrowed their practices to seemingly only worship Vigar the sea god, who they called the drowned god. Who better to treat with Balon Greyjoy than his son? Robb asked. Jason Mallister offered Catelyn. Tytos Blackwood. Stephen Frey. Anyone but not Theon. Robb turned from his mother, ignoring her as she had done to him, and squatted beside Grey Wind, ruffling his wolf's fur and incidentally avoiding his mother's eyes. Robb was sick of hearing his mother slander Theon. She never liked nor trusted him any more than she did Jon, yet Robb knew better. Theon may have come to Winterfell as a political hostage, but he was not chained or beaten. He was loved and raised at Winterfell. He was one of them. Theon's fought bravely for us. He kneeled before me and called me king. Since I was a boy we've eaten together, trained together, hunted together. If the Lannisters won't make peace, I'll have need of Lord Greyjoy's longships. You'll have them sooner if you keep his son as hostage. Robb winced at his mother deigning to call Theon a hostage still after all he'd done. Theon had been loyal and good and was no prisoner. Balon Greyjoy could have invaded the North 1,000 times, and Ned Stark would have put any man who tried to hurt Theon to the sword before touching him. Theon is as much a brother to me as Jon, Bran or Rickon. He could be no closer to me, be more loved by me than he is now if the blood of Karla flowed through his veins as it does mine and did my father before me. Catelyn looked horrified at Robb's words. And does he feel the same way? Will he feel the same way when he meets his father? Balon Greyjoy is not a man to be trusted. He wore a crown himself, remember, if only for a season. He may aspire to wear one again, and Theon will be expected to wear it after him. Robb stood from his crouched position next to Grey Wind. I will not grudge him that. If I am High King of the Northern Realm, let him be King of the Iron Islands, if that's his desire. I'll give him a crown gladly, so long as he helps us bring down the Lannisters. Robb. I'm sending Theon. Good day, Mother. Grey Wind, come. Robb walked off briskly, the direwolf padding beside him. Robb would not turn back. He would not let his mother think him doubtful of his choices even for a moment. Robb turned a corner of the corridor with Grey Wind following behind and came face to face with Theon, standing at the wall around the corner. Robb's heart fluttered with surprise, having almost knocked into the dark-haired Greyjoy. Theon, Robb said. Robb glanced back down the hall, but his mother and uncle had gone off in the opposite direction. Robb looked back to his best friend and studied his face. He was less confident and cheerful than usual, his face seeming solemn instead. The corridor was not a long one, and Theon could have easily overheard Robb's entire conversation with his mother. Did you? Robb hesitated to ask how much Theon heard, but could tell from his face that he heard enough to know how Robb felt about him. Robb cleared his throat, not wishing to address the awkwardness of Theon having heard Robb's declarations of brotherly love for him. Did you need something? Robb asked, trying to change the subject. A faint smile flickered on Theon's face, but one different from his standard smile, a gentle and sincere one. The prisoner is prepared for you, Theon explained. When Robb was arranging for Sir Cleos to be brought before his court, he ordered Jon and Theon to then go down to the cells and arrange for another prisoner to be brought to the castle's kennel and chained up alone in a cage, and the kennel master and any guards to wait outside. Robb, Theon and Grey Wind marched through the castle and out to the courtyard where the kennel was, a small wooden stable fit for dogs rather than horses with barred wooden gates. Jon waited outside with Ghost sitting next to him. Robb signaled Grey Wind to stay with Ghost as Jon led Robb and Theon into the kennel. Several hounds were caged on either side of the corridor of cages, but in one dark cell down the back, the floor covered with hay, dressed in a dirty and ruined gambeson, his face covered in dirt, was not a hound but a lion. Sir Jaime Lannister sat against a wooden post in the center of the cell, his left hand chained behind his back and the other free, for he could not do much with a bandaged stump. The Kingslayer's golden hair was now dirty and tangled. He'd grown a beard in his captivity, and many of the injuries to his face dealt to him by Jon were now small cuts almost healed. As Robb approached, he noticed a large metal collar chained around his neck and attached to the pole, clearly meant to leash the dogs who were supposed to be in the cage. If Robb had to guess, it was Theon who put it around the Kingslayer's neck. Sir Jaime looked up from the stump of his right arm that the guards reported him to glower at endlessly. King in the north, the Kingslayer mocked as he saw Robb approach, flanked by Theon and Jon at either shoulder. Robb nodded to Theon, signaling him to open the gate of the cage. "Are these to be my new lodgings then, Stark?" Lannister asked as he looked around the kennel. "Some jape about them being more suited to my station perhaps." Robb smirked and had considered making such a joke, but it would not come off as good if the Kingslayer was expecting it. "You're here so that we can talk directly without an audience of onlookers. As I'm sure you're aware, the dungeons are getting rather crowded these days. Seems you Lannisters are better at surrendering than fighting," Theon chided, leaning against the wooden bars of the cage. "As was your father, after all, he gave you up without a fight." The Kingslayer bit back at Theon, causing Greyjoy to scowl. Jaime then turned his eyes to Jon, cold and scornful. "There he is," Jaime said through gritted teeth, trying to feign a confident smile, but the anger in his eyes betrayed him. "There's the bastard himself." The Kingslayer seethed at the teeth in the sight of Jon, but Jon remained impassive and quiet as he stared back fearlessly at Sir Jaime. "Well, bastard. Are you not going to thank me? Are you not grateful for all I've given you?" Jon did not respond. "You see, bastard, I had to work for my reputation. I slew men of the Kingswood Brotherhood, crossed swords with the Smiling Knight and lived to tell of it, and earned my spurs all when I was your age. I was the youngest man to ever join the Kingsguard. I trained with the 6 greatest knights of their time, men who could make short work of any man in your entire army. I've won tourneys in joust and melee, I fought at pike and made sliced meat of Greyjoy's kinsmen," he bragged with his eyes glancing over to Theon again. "Then you, a bastard nobody. One lucky strike and now all of a sudden you're a great swordsman." "Oh," he took Jaime Lannister's hand in battle, "he must be the greatest swordsman who ever walked." The Kingslayer shook his head. "You're lucky, bastard, that's all you are. Soon some random foot soldier will cut you down and then he'll earn his spurs and be called a great warrior until someone cuts him down. If I had taken you seriously, killed you outright instead of toying with you, I gave you your glory, bastard, me," Sir Jaime declared. "Handed it to me," more like Jon finally said, bringing a grin to Robb's face and snorts from Theon. The scowling Kingslayer's eyes returned to the king. "So, what's this all about then, Stark?" Robb held his head up high. "I'm sending your cousin, Sir Cleos Frey, to King's Landing with my peace terms. My sisters and my men were taken by your father at the Green Fork and will be released. The bones and possessions of my father and his men will be returned. You will remain my prisoner, and the lands of the north, the Riverlands and the Vale will be ceded to me and ruled by the House of Stark in perpetuity." Sir Jaime scoffed at Robb's words. "My father will never yield half the country to you or anyone, nor my sister, and certainly not Joffrey." Robb smiled once more. "I know. That's the point. I've given my peace terms even after my father's murder. Now, no one can say that I did not try for peace first when I burn your house to the ground. No one will say a word when I hunt down and wipe out your entire house and put my sword through Joffrey's face." Sir Jaime nodded his head. "Ah. I see. An offer of peace for the history books, just so people know you tried to do things civilly before you massacred the lot of us. A formality to justify your carnage. Smart boy." Robb's face went stern again, for he needed no approval from the likes of the Kingslayer. "What's wrong?" Sir Jaime asked, noticing Robb stiffen. "You don't like being called boy?" Insulted, the Kingslayer chided, but Robb was not so easily provoked, not anymore. Robb let out a sharp whistle that rang out through the kennel, and the dogs closest to the door grew quiet as Grey Wind and Ghost came in. The 2 direwolves slowly padded down the middle of the kennel between the cages, the hounds silencing as the wolves passed them by. When the Kingslayer caught sight of the wolves as they approached, his cocky smile faded. "You insult yourself, Kingslayer," Robb stated as the snarling wolves came closer. "You were outsmarted by a boy. Your host was destroyed by a boy. You were captured by a boy. Your army was put to flight by a boy. You're at the mercy of a boy." Theon stepped back and allowed the 2 wolves to come to either side of Robb, their heads sticking inside the open gate of the cage, the pair licking their lips and snarling at the captive Lannister. "Perhaps you'll be killed by a boy," Robb suggested as Sir Jaime tensed up in fear of the 2 snarling wolves before him. "Stannis Baratheon sent ravens to all the High Lords of Westeros. The household of half my bannermen across all 3 of my kingdoms sent me copies in case word hadn't yet reached me. I wrote them back and told them to copy the letters and send them to the Iron Islands, the Reach, Dawn and even to the Westerlands so that your father's own men can know the truth. I've even received several copies rewritten by Renly and his vassals who clearly had the same idea as me. I doubt that within a fortnight there will be a single man, woman or child who doesn't know the contents of Stannis's letter from Dawn to the Valley of Than beyond the wall. Sir Jaime was too petrified of the wolves to respond. The letter claims that King Joffrey Baratheon is neither a true king nor a true Baratheon. Sir Jaime's gaze left the wolves and returned to Robb. He's your bastard son, Robb declared. Jaime did his best to deny it with a smirk but was still nervous in the presence of the dire wolves gnashing their teeth at him. If that's true, Stannis is the rightful king. How convenient for him. The Kingslayer's denial was not as convincing as he probably believed it to be. Jon Arryn, my uncle by marriage, he learned the truth and you poisoned him. I didn't. Arryn was an old man, time killed him, not me. Either Sir Jaime was lying or he didn't truly know what his beloved sister was capable of. My father, our father, Robb corrected himself, speaking for himself, Jon and Theon. He picked up after Jon Arryn and then he learned the truth, that's why you had him executed. I was your prisoner when Ned Stark lost his head. Your son killed him so that the world wouldn't learn who fathered him. And you. Robb's anger stirred again within him and both Ghost and Grey Wind's snarls got more ferocious. You pushed our brother from the window of that tower because he saw you with the queen. The two wolves, growling, snarling and licking their lips, padded deeper into the cage and closer to the Kingslayer. Do you have proof? Does Stannis? Does Renly? No. So do you want to sit here and trade idle gossip like a couple of fishwives? Sir Jaime asked. The Stormlands have declared for Renly and the coastal and island-dwelling houses of the Crown Lands have declared for Stannis. Not even Robert's own bannermen believe your son is a true Baratheon. Now Robert's brothers are closing in on him, Robb declared. Jaime leaned his head back against the post and as though he was trying to stretch his head above water as the two wolves growled at him. Stannis is a great military leader but a grumpy old fuck that no one will follow. Renly is a charismatic winner of hearts but greener than the freshest grove of grass in all the Reach. One lacks men and the other lacks the skill to use them. One will kill the other and my father will deal with whatever is left or he'll take them both on. Robb shrugged. That may be so, but even if he does, no matter how easily he destroys Stannis or Renly, he will walk away with fewer men than he has now and that's fewer men to use against me and he'll need every man he can get. Jaime smirked once again, his head still tensed up in fear of the wolves. You think my father will fear you? Clearly, you don't know him very well. No. But he's starting to know me. Sir Jaime's mouth tightened. 2 victories don't make you a conqueror, the Kingslayer said sternly. Perhaps. But it's better than 2 defeats. Grey Wind stepped closer to the Kingslayer, guided by Robb's mind. The skin changer bond was a powerful thing, even when not in a trance to enter Grey Wind's mind, Robb could still command his direwolf with thought as long as he concentrated and was close by. Grey Wind growled through his teeth at the Kingslayer's face and with one snap of his maw he bit at the air in front of Sir Jaime's face and then left the cell, followed close behind by Ghost. Sir Jaime was left petrified and probably soiled breeches. Robb then turned and followed the wolves out of the kennel having made his point. Theon shut and locked the cage behind them as the 3 left Sir Jaime paralyzed in fear. Chapter 14, The King on the Throne. Chapter text. King Joffrey examined the blade, as was expected of him. It was long and sharp and made of castle-forged steel, the same as any other sword, but it was the hilt that Joffrey was interested in. Unless a blade is crafted from Valyrian steel, one sword is as good as any other as long as the blade is long and sharp. It was the hilt that was special, the hilt that showed the glory and status of the one who wielded it. The sword in Joffrey's hand had a simple hilt with a brown leather grip, a lion head pommel and a plain crossguard, boring and simple. Joffrey tossed it back onto the table with the other swords and picked up another. Joffrey had commissioned the smiths to prepare a sword fit for a king and they'd fashioned several for him to choose from. It was long past time Joffrey had a new proper sword since his faithful blade Lion's Tooth had been cast into the river by that wretched wolf bitch, Arya Stark. Joffrey commanded the gold cloaks to scour the streets of King's Landing for her but the little animal had escaped or with luck, she was dead in a ditch somewhere. Lord Janos reported that he would keep searching for the girl every time he reported to the king until he disappeared one night. First, the Stark girl disappeared, then Littlefinger, then Lord Janos. In the meantime, Joffrey's wretched little monster of an uncle, Tyrion, had arrived in King's Landing with an army of cutthroats and savages, just about ruining Joffrey's name-a-day celebration, and had been installed by Joffrey's grandfather as acting hand. Since then, Uncle Tyrion had been pestering Joffrey on how to act like a king, as though the imp knew anything about such matters and tried to boss Joffrey around. Joffrey was the king, no one could tell him what to do. Joffrey picked up another sword, this one with a crossguard in the shape of stag antlers and a wooden hilt. Joffrey liked the design somewhat, but the hilt was made from steel, not gold, and so Joffrey cast it aside and looked at another. The smiths who stood before the king seemed to flinch as the sword clattered on the table. Probably scared that their precious swords would be scratched, but Joffrey did not care. Whatever swords he'd reject he'd let his knights pick from. His cousin Sir Lancel would appreciate one of the lion-styled swords. Eventually, Joffrey's hands came to a sword sheathed in a scabbard of red leather overlaid with tracery wrought of gold. The hilt of the sword was golden with a decoratively engraved crossguard, the grip wrapped in boiled leather imprinted with more tracery, and the pommel, a golden lion's head, and clutched in its jaw was a ruby carved in the shape of a heart. Joffrey pulled the sword halfway out of its scabbard and noticed the castle-forged steel bore 3 fullers incised deeply in the blade. A smile curled at the corner of Joffrey's lips. "This one, what's its name?" asked Joffrey. The smiths hesitated to speak. "Its name, your grace," one of the smiths asked. "Yes, its name, what did you call it?" Joffrey asked, more angrily at having to repeat himself. We didn't think to give it a name," the smith admitted. Joffrey snorted. "All great swords must have names, elseways how will they be remembered?" Joffrey pulled the sword from its sheath entirely and swung it about, making the smiths shudder in fear. "This is the blade that will slay the 3 usurpers who greedily covet my throne. My traitor uncles and the Stark mutt, Robb." Joffrey cut down through the air as though he were taking the heads of the 3 traitors with one swift strike. What to name such a mighty sword? Joffrey pondered some names in his head: Wolfsbane, Crownfang, Lion's Wrath, Blooddrinker, Stormbringer, Malice, Silencer. No, none of those names fit the blade. Joffrey was a great king and had the wisdom of a great king, it was in his blood, and naming his sword would be simple enough when the time was right. "Well, fear not, good smiths. The king has the weight of all the realm's struggles on his shoulders. I shall graciously add the naming of this sword to my responsibilities." With that Joffrey dismissed his smiths and had them collect up the swords and usher them out of Joffrey's solar. After the smiths had left, Joffrey raced to the closest mirror and fixed the sword belt around his waist. He then swung the blade around, admiring his own reflection. Joffrey thought the realm lucky to have a man like him, 13 years old with a full life of glory and power ahead of him. He was tall for a boy his age, with blonde curly hair and deep green eyes, a greatly handsome man in the eyes of the women of the realm. He wore a dark tunic bordered with gold embroidering. Over it, he wore a claret jerkin detailed with yellow floral patterns, a golden gorget engraved with lions, and a long red cloak. Joffrey sheathed his blade and fetched his crown and long dark leather gloves off of his desk and put them on before returning to his mirror. The crown was elegantly crafted, gold-crusted and set with rubies and black diamonds. Now Joffrey looked like a real king. Now that Joffrey looked the part, it was time to act the part. The realm needed him, now more than ever. Joffrey took long proud strides across his solar to the door and exited through it. Standing next to the door was Joffrey's loyal Kingsguard, Sandor Clegane, known by most as the Hound. Sandor was a huge and heavily muscled man with a gaunt face with sharp cheekbones and a heavy brow. His eyes were grey, his nose large and hooked, and long dark and thin hair. The natural half of his face was menacing in itself, but the other half of his face was something to behold. The left half of the Hound's face was burned ruin of scars, slick black flesh pocked with craters and deep cracks that oozed red and wet. His ear was only a hole with a stump, and a hint of bone shows on his jaw. The scars extended down to his throat. There was a twisted mass of scars around his eye, which was still good, but he had no lips on that side. Sandor had been Joffrey's sworn shield for as long as he could remember, a menacing and ruthless warrior under Joffrey's command. Joffrey was very fond of Clegane and often called him his dog, something he took no offense to, for Sandor thought dogs good and loyal creatures. It was knights Sandor had disgust for and no interest in being associated with such. The hound dressed in plain, silk dark armor, a long sword and a dagger hung from either side of his sword belt. Under his left arm he clutched his dark helm sculpted into the shape of a snarling dog's head, and hanging from his back, fastened with a jeweled brooch, was the white woolen cloak of the King's Guard. The hound was the first warrior named to the King's Guard who was not a knight, replacing the withering old man, Sir Barristan Selmy. There were many who whined and moaned about tradition and rules when Joffrey dismissed Sir Barristan and gave the hound his cloak, but Joffrey was king, his word was law. Joffrey turned to the hound and showed off his new sword, pulling about 3 inches from its scabbard to show the steel. "What do you think, dog?" Joffrey asked. The hound grunted hoarsely. "Castle-forged steel and a sharp edge, as good a sword as you can get, your grace." The hound's words were in his rough and rasping voice and his tone always blunt and stern. "I thought so too. I haven't yet chosen a name for it, but it will come to me," Joffrey declared as he drove the blade back into its sheath. "You want to be one of those people who names their sword?" asked Clegane, his brow furrowed. "Lots of people name their swords. Lots of cunts, your grace. That may be so for those low-born knights and lesser nobles who flail about with simple steel, but swords such as this are deadly things with great reputations of slain men. They deserve to be remembered. Blackfyr, Dark Sister, Dawn and others like them, they are remembered because they are deadly. It's not the swords that are deadly, your grace, it's the men who wield them. A sword with a reputation is a sword passed around amongst skilled killers." Joffrey's dog was not particularly wise nor poetic, yet now and again he said something clever. True enough, it was Joffrey's skill that would make the sword worthy of the history books, but all the same Joffrey would honor it with a name. "Come, dog. Let us talk no more of swords. I have kingdoms to run and wars to win." Joffrey strode through the halls and down the stairs of Maegor's Holdfast and crossed the drawbridge over the moat of spikes. Every servant, guard, noble and knight who passed him bowed their heads in submission and reverence to their king, as it should be. Joffrey made his way to the great hall, which was under heavy construction, as per Joffrey's command. The pillars and walls were surrounded by tarps, ladders and scaffolding, and the hall was filled with stonemasons, craftsmen and architects. It was a new era in the Seven Kingdoms, and the throne room would change with the times. One of the few things that would remain untouched in the throne room was the asymmetric monstrosity of spikes and jagged edges and twisted metal that stood on a high platform at the end of the great hall. 1,000 melted, twisted, beaten, and broken blades mangled together in dragon fire by Aegon the Conqueror into the great Iron Throne. Joffrey had stripped away the hunting tapestries that once hung in the hall, and the workers were laboring away to remove the vine patterns upon the columns and replace the stained glass windows that bore stags and does in the forests and flowers. Joffrey could not wait to sit upon the throne once the great hall was finished. He could see himself up there so clearly in his mind, dressed in black plate armor detailed with gold, a long red cloak like the one he had on, his crown upon his head and his sword clutched in his hand like a scepter. And a chain, he thought. A very long chain gripped in his other hand that went all the way down to the base of the throne and hooked to a metal collar around the throat of Sansa Stark. He'd have her on her knees, his pet she-wolf, and men who approached the king would have to see the king's she-wolf obediently kneeling at her master's feet. The hound may have been Joffrey's dog, but Sansa Stark was Joffrey's good northern bitch, and even if she wasn't his queen she'd still be his. Joffrey also wanted skulls. Just as the Targaryens had decorated the throne room with dragon skulls, Joffrey would have the skulls of his enemies mounted on pedestals. One for Ned Stark, one for Hoster Tully, one for little Robert Arryn, one for Mace Tyrell, traitors the lot of them, and of course closest to the throne he'd have the skulls of the 3 usurpers, Robb Stark and Joffrey's uncles Renly and Stannis, each of their skulls adorned with their crowns in mockery of their treason. A shame the Mad King Aerys was cremated after his death, as per Targaryen tradition, for his skull would make a great addition. Perhaps Joffrey would find some old man whose time was past, skin him and throw his skull in the fire until it was black and charred, then put it on a pedestal and prop the heavy crown of Aegon the Unworthy on top and say that the Mad King's head was salvaged from the flames. Who would be the wiser? He thought. The king would say it was Aerys' skull, and the king's word is law. "What is all this?" a voice asked. Joffrey turned his head back and saw his mother approach. A strikingly beautiful woman with wavy golden hair, emerald green eyes, sharp dark eyebrows, fair skin, and a slender, graceful figure. Her lashes were darkened and her lips reddened with makeup. She wore a long crimson red gown with off-the-shoulder loose baggy sleeves, a gold collar necklace set with 3 rubies, red gem-set earrings, and her crown sat upon her brow. "I am returning this room to its proper appearance," Mother Joffrey declared as the Dowager Queen came close. "Say what you will about the Targaryens, they were conquerors." "That is a seat for a conqueror," Joffrey declared, pointing to the Iron Throne across the Great Hall. "It needs a room to match it, not vines and flowers." Joffrey's eyes looked to the columns as the floral detailing was chiseled away. The Queen Mother did not seem impressed as she looked around the throne room, but whatever opinions she had, she kept to herself. "Your grandfather remains at Harrenhal," Cersei declared in a sour tone. Joffrey faced his mother with a vexed expression. "Yes, so. What does that have to do with me? Stannis and Renly Baratheon are summoning hosts to attack us. We need your grandfather here to protect us. He refuses to listen to me, but if you asked him..." "A king does not ask," Joffrey declared sternly, cutting off his mother, "he commands." Cersei looked at her son with a cold and unpleasant expression. "And I for one, have no intention of commanding grandfather to return to us. I can protect us well enough. I have the city watch, the garrisons of Lannister troops and knights, and sell swords throughout this city. Besides, I have not yet forgiven grandfather. His stupidity on the field of battle allowed Robb Stark to take Uncle Jaime and break our siege at Riverrun. I will not have him return to me until he brings me Robb Stark's head to redeem himself." What could Joffrey expect? His grandfather liked to think himself a great warrior, but what did he truly know of warfare? The only real war he fought in was when he squired in the Stepstones as a boy. The Rain Tarbeck revolt was 2 houses against the rest of the Westerlands, hardly a war. Duskendale was a long-besieged castle that Tywin broke with superior numbers. It was Joffrey's father who won the real war. He killed Prince Rhaegar, he took the crown, all the while his grandfather hid under Casterly Rock and waited until the end before riding out and sacking King's Landing under a false banner of peace. Joffrey saw it now. When it came to warfare, Tywin Lannister was an old and inexperienced fool, and if he wanted to return to Joffrey's magnificent presence, he'd best earn it by paying for his blunders with the severed heads of traitor kings. Joffrey would also have Robb Stark's bitch mother's head and show them both to Sansa. Not only them, but the heads of the Blackfish, Benjen Stark, Edmure Tully, Walder Frey, the Great Jon Umber, Roose Bolton, the Bronze Jon Royce, and Ned Stark's bastard who took Jaime's hand, the White Wolf as they were calling him. Every knight and lord of note who crossed Joffrey would have their heads taken, and their skulls would decorate the Great Hall. "We should not be so hasty to put the Northerners to the sword. Not until we've successfully recovered Jaime," Cersei declared, her voice trembling as she said her brother's name. Joffrey winced, thinking about the whispers and comments that he had heard in the halls. Comments about Joffrey's looks, about Sir Jaime's movements around the castle. Eventually, he asked the Hound what everyone was bickering about, and the most vile and disgusting gossip was being spread around. Joffrey was enraged when he heard Stannis had spread such slander across the 7 kingdoms, and now the vile accusations were everywhere from Dorne to the north. Joffrey went into a mad rage when he found out, throwing things around his chamber and pushing over a table. He also had Sansa brought to him and had Sir Meryn strike her cheeks for her father's part in creating the slander. Joffrey sized his mother up. "I heard a disgusting lie about Uncle Jaime, and you." Cersei's expression remained cold and stern. "I've heard them. A concoction by Stannis and Ned Stark's conspiring, no doubt. Our enemies will say anything to weaken your claim to the throne." Joffrey peered at his mother. "It's not a claim, the throne is mine." After realizing her mistake, Cersei smiled and took Joffrey's hand. "Of course," she said in flattery as she took Joffrey's hand to her lips and kissed his ring adoringly. "Redecorating, are we, Your Grace?" a familiar and unwelcome voice asked as Joffrey's uncle Tyrion came waddling into the Great Hall. The short little misshapen monster was ugly as ever to behold, with stunted legs, stubby fingers, and a jutting forehead. Mismatched eyes of green and black, thin hair was fair and flaxen, so blonde it could appear white in certain light, and had recently grown a full thick beard of yellow, white and black hair that now hung upon his face. He wore a red jerkin detailed with gold samite with a pale red shirt of cotton beneath it and a chain necklace made of silver hands hanging around his neck, a symbol of his office as Hand of the King. "I am refurbishing the Great Hall to match the majesty of the Iron Throne and myself," Joffrey declared, holding his head up high. Yes, I can see that. And I see that you've also picked a new sword. I am happy for you. After all, you did commission 20 unique and elegantly crafted blades be made for you to choose from. The best and most expensive smiths from the Street of Steel tried their hand, if I am not mistaken. Joffrey looked down at the hilt of his new blade and back to his uncle. That is right. A king should have a kingly weapon, Joffrey declared. Of course, he should. A kingly weapon, a kingly throne room and all the kingly things that go along with it. I am also especially glad to see that despite being heavily in debt to the Iron Bank and our Master of Coin disappearing, you've found ample funds to pay for your swords and throne room without eating into the funds we need to pay for the defenses and arming for our city should we fall under attack, unless of course, you neglected to take those funds into account, nephew, said Tyrion, his tone turning bitter. The people will do what their king commands them whether they are paid or not. Besides, I have ordered that the other swords I didn't choose be distributed amongst the knights here in the castle. Our best warriors will be armed with swords fit for a king if our enemies attack. And as for the Iron Bank, what is the worst they can do? Not give us more money. They'll fund our enemies and get their gold back from our looted corpses, said Tyrion. Well, fine. We'll just have grandfather pay the debt. Problem solved. Problem not solved. Littlefinger borrowed money from your grandfather as well, meaning in order for him to pay it, he'd have to forgive the millions he is already owed by the crown and then give away tens of millions more to pay off the Iron Bank and also pay for his own army's war effort. Well, you're the hand of the king, you fix it, Joffrey commanded. I am trying, but if I am going to succeed, you are going to need to stop with all this frivolous spending until the war is won. From now on, if you want to spend money, you must first check with Lord Giles Rosby, Tyrion declared. Joffrey exchanged looks with his mother, both very confused. Lord Giles Rosby. Joffrey repeated. Your new master of coin. He has settled into the role rather well and has already thought of several ways to mitigate costs and create revenue, Tyrion declared. An apt choice, said Cersei. Lord Rosby is a man of great wealth and experience. I am sure he will be of great value as master of coin. Joffrey snorted at his mother's words. Giles Rosby was an elderly and sickly creature, always coughing and spluttering into a square of scarlet silk trimmed with golden lace. But I do wonder if naming a replacement to the post of Master of Coin might be a bit premature. We are still yet to understand the reason for Lord Baelish's disappearance. Actually, sweet sister, we do. Varys received word from his little birds in the Vale. Apparently, Littlefinger was spotted leaving the Eyrie with a retinue of Vale knights and in the company of a young girl reported to be roughly the same age as Arya Stark, Tyrion explained. Cersei's eyes widened and her breath steepened. That craven disloyal bastard, she growled. Do you mean to say that Baelish has betrayed us? Joffrey asked. It would seem so, nephew. Furthermore, it appears that our hopes of ransoming both the Stark girls for Jaime have been dashed. Littlefinger has left us in debt and one hostage shorter and can give away all our weaknesses and advantages to the Starks. Joffrey strutted around in a circle with clenched fists. Littlefinger, the whelp from the Vale, practically born a commoner, had the nerve to betray me. Me. I am King Joffrey Baratheon. The king's mind swirled with anger and rage. I will have that wretched cocksucker's head on a spike. Mark my words, uncle. Joffrey declared, pointing his finger at Tyrion. I have no doubt, but I'm afraid quite a hefty sum of Northmen, Rivermen and Valiman now lie between us and him, so you might have to wait a while, Tyrion explained, looking at the tip Joffrey's finger in front of his face. In the meantime, there is much to be done. Our primary focus should be to fortify the city. Stannis is assembling his fleet on Dragonstone and Renly is rallying the Stormlands and the Reach into a united army. Cersei shook her head in dismay. You believe they intend to attack King's Landing? Asked Cersei. I do, in fact, I expect them to race one another for it. Both of Robert's brothers are vying for the same supporters and whichever one takes this city and the Iron Throne and more importantly our beloved Joffrey's head. Tyrion motioned to Joffrey. Why, that one will have both a symbolic and tactical advantage over the other and will undoubtedly use it to sway the other's supporters to switch sides. But I am the one who has the city and the throne and the right to it. Why do none of these traitors turn to me, their rightful king? Joffrey grunted angrily. Tyrion shrugged. Well, Recently it appears your dear Uncle Stannis has sent letters to every corner of the realm telling everyone that you happen to be blonde, and it seems blonde people are not allowed to be kings. According to Stannis, only people with silver hair, or black hair, or in your Uncle Stannis's case, no hair can sit the Iron Throne. I can't turn your hair silver or black, so should I fetch a pair of shears and solidify your claim to the throne, your grace? Joffrey did not appreciate his uncle's foul little japes in the slightest, making a mockery of the slanderous lies that had been levied against Joffrey and his mother and uncle. These are all lies and slanders. My uncle knows I am the rightful king, and he's fabricating all this nonsense to steal my throne. Joffrey snapped. Of course they are. We all know you are the rightful king, Cersei declared, taking her son's arm. But we're not the ones who need convincing, Tyrion interjected. Cersei looked down at the dwarf and scowled. What are you on about? She asked bitterly. Your father was Lord of the Stormlands first and then the direct ruler of the Crown Lands. Now the entirety of the Stormlands are backing Renly and half the Crown Lands are backing Stannis. Your father's own bannermen don't support you, much less the rest of the Seven Kingdoms, Tyrion declared. Well, what am I supposed to do about it? The foolish traitors are the ones listening to these lies. I cannot think properly for them, uncle. No, you can't, but the symbolism it portrays to the other kingdoms is not a favorable one, so for your sake, I would have you consider at least dressing more like a stag than a lion, Tyrion explained, motioning to Joffrey's attire of red and gold, the Lannister colors. I will dress as I see fit, Joffrey declared sternly, though, in the back of his mind, he considered it would not hurt to dress more as a Baratheon like his father would. Tyrion clapped his hands together. Well, I would love to stand here and talk kingly fashion and throne room decorations with you all day, nephew. Alas, there are things to attend to, such as preparing the city for an impending attack, Tyrion explained. Yes, off you go, uncle. You're dismissed, Joffrey declared. Tyrion smiled insincerely, bowed his head and turned to leave. As Tyrion marched off, Joffrey turned and faced the Iron Throne and watched as the workers continued to tear away the old decorations. The Iron Throne was Joffrey's and he would let no one sit it but him, not Stannis, not Renly, and least of all Robb Stark. The only kingly thing they were entitled to was to have their blood wet the steel of Joffrey's new sword. Joffrey glanced down at the hilt and looked at the pommel of the snarling lion with the ruby heart clutched in its fangs, and suddenly Joffrey realized what to call his new blade. Joffrey smiled as the thought of his new blade's name. Heart Eater. Chapter 15, The Second Host. Chapter text. The journey from the Eyrie had been long and tiring. For weeks on end, Arya sat on the front of Lothar Brun's saddle as they crossed through the Vale and the Riverlands. Arya and Littlefinger set off with the same party they had disembarked from the ship with, along with an honor guard of 50 Vale Knights courtesy of Arya's Aunt Lysa. During the days they trotted or galloped through the countryside, and at night they camped or took shelter at a castle loyal to Robb's new kingdom or an inn. While the views of the country were entertaining now and again, Arya spent most of her time doing something of actual use, warging. Since her brothers brought the direwolf pups home to Winterfell, each of them began training as skin changers. Arya had made the bond with Nymeria when she was a pup, being able to sense her, feel her emotions and delve into her mind in a trance-like state. Since Arya was forced to send Nymeria away at the Ruby Ford, for fear that King Robert's men would have killed her, Arya spent every available hour she could entering Nymeria's mind, taking control of her and sending her further north. It was hard work, for it was often difficult to find north through the eyes of a direwolf in the wilderness, and sometimes while Arya was in King's Landing when she would walk into Nymeria, she'd find her wolf somewhere completely different from where Arya had left her before. When Arya wound up on Littlefinger's ship after her father's murder, all she did every day before they set out was walk into Nymeria. Eventually, she was able to guide Nymeria back to the Ruby Ford and led her up along the King's Road and along the coast of the Green Fork. At one point Arya watched through Nymeria's eyes as a great Lannister army marched south with haste while Arya's direwolf hid in the bushes. Later, when Arya arrived in the Vale and was told about how the war had unfolded, Arya could only surmise that the army was Tywin's, in his attempt to march south and cross the Trident to save his son, Jaime. Eventually, a few days after Arya set out from the Eyrie with Littlefinger, she walked into Nymeria's mind and saw that she was at the Twins, the exact place where Arya was heading. Arya was ecstatic to get to the Twins and reunite with her wolf. She told Littlefinger and the rest of their party that Nymeria was waiting for them and they needed to get there faster, but several of them were skeptical about the validity of Arya's walk powers. Every day since then, Arya made sure that Nymeria never wandered too far from the twins and that she didn't kill any farmers or attract any hunters. A few days later, while Arya was in Nymeria's mind, she noticed a cavalry of horses and unicorns from Skagos and a giant come to the twins, and a day later they rode out the other end of the twins, traveling south towards Riverrun. A few weeks after that, Arya saw a great camp of many tents and soldiers under northern banners assembled in the lands around the twins. All their banners were of the houses and clans from beyond the wall. Arya told Littlefinger and his men about the army of Northmen that awaited them at the twins, but many of them laughed and mocked her. Skeptics of the abilities of the skin changer, they dismissed Arya's trances when she entered while they were on the road as some strange condition that a maester could explain away, and claimed her visions of Nymeria were nothing more than dreams. Littlefinger even suggested while sitting around the campfire one night that they wager to see if the northern camp and Arya's wolf were at the twins, with Littlefinger winking to Arya and placing a wager that Arya spoke true. After a long journey from the Eyrie, they finally drew near to the twins. Arya was overjoyed. Nymeria was so close now, as were her father's bannermen at the twins, and after that, it was down to Riverrun where Robb, Jon and her mother were. As their convoy of horses galloped through the grasslands surrounded by clusters of forest on either side, Arya felt something, sensed something. "Stop," she shouted. Littlefinger pulled his reins from the horse ahead of her and raised his hand, bringing their train of horses to a halt. "What is it, girl?" Brune asked. Arya looked around and became certain that what she sensed was real. Arya looked to the tree line to her right, darkened and shadowed by the dense treetops that blocked out the sun above. "She's here," Arya said, a gentle smile curling at her lips. Who's here?" Brune asked. "Let me down. Let me down now," Arya commanded, her smile growing as she tried to dismount, but Brune held her steady on the saddle. "What are you doing, little wolf?" "The twins is just beyond here," Littlefinger stated, pointing ahead of them. "She's here," Arya asserted. Littlefinger's expression turned to intrigue. "Is she now?" he asked, looking to the tree line. "You heard the girl, Brune. Let her down," Littlefinger commanded. Reluctantly Brune dismounted and brought Arya down from the saddle while the rest watched from their horses. Arya bolted towards the tree line and stopped at the edge of the shadows cast down from the treetops. From within the dark, Arya could feel her presence. It was as though she could see her clear as day. Arya dropped to her knee. "Nymeria," she said softly. Arya heard a rapid sniffing sound from the dark, followed by the padding of wolf paws. From within the shadow of the tree line Arya saw the glint of a pair of eyes for a moment, and then out of the shadows came the direwolf. She'd grown so big since Arya had last seen her. Her dark golden eyes remained the same, but her grey fur had become dirty and matted around her legs. When Arya and Jory were forced to send her away, she refused no matter what Arya said. They had to throw rocks at her. Arya hit her twice and she whined and looked at Arya before scampering off. If Arya hadn't sent her away, the Queen and Joffrey would have killed her. She had no choice, but that did not erase the shame. "I'm sorry," Arya croaked as she began to sob. "I'm so very sorry." Arya wasn't sure what came next. Would Nymeria leave her, maul her? Arya wouldn't be able to blame her for either. Did Nymeria even know it was Arya who entered her mind and guided her there? She could not say. As Arya knelt on the ground sobbing, her direwolf came close, sniffed her face, her wet black nose touching her forehead, and then Nymeria began to lick away the tears on Arya's face. Forgiveness, Arya thought. Arya reached out and wrapped her arms around her direwolf, hugging her close as Nymeria nuzzled her head against Arya's. Littlefinger let Arya have her moment, and then Arya led her companion back to the train of horses. Abashed and shocked faces welcomed Arya and Nymeria. All those skeptics who laughed at her and her walk-bond now knew the truth of her words. Littlefinger seemed impressed with Arya, though was probably happier with the gold he'd won from his men, wagering in Arya's favor. The horses nickered and recoiled as Nymeria approached. "Everyone. This is Nymeria," Arya announced with authority. "She is my companion and personal protector. Any man who harms her will pay for it. You heard Princess Arya. Nymeria is now our welcome companion," Littlefinger declared. Arya gently growled at Littlefinger, though turned away. Much like Arya, she did not fully trust him. "Come, Princess, let us continue to the twins," said Brune as he lifted Arya back onto the saddle, with Nymeria padding to the horse's side. Princess, Arya thought. A worse title than when Arya was called a lady. Now that Robb was a king, Arya was a princess of the north and so was Sansa, but she probably wasn't allowed to be called that as Joffrey's prisoner. Sansa would have loved being called a princess and probably have a stupid giggle every time she heard it. Sansa liked being treated all special and important, but Arya didn't. The convoy resumed its gallop with Nymeria following along Arya's side. A short while later, the twins came into sight. An ugly pair of identical castles on either side of a river with a stone bridge running between them, but spread out on the eastern bank around the twins was the great camp of Northmen that Arya had seen through Nymeria's eyes, just as promised. Littlefinger laughed. "Behold, my friends, Princess Arya has made me a richer man," Littlefinger gloated, having won the wager in full. As they drew nearer, Arya could see the banners more clearly. A bronze ring on a field of white with ancient runes of the first men, the banner of House Than of the Valley of Than. A white crescent moon and axe on a field of grey, the banner of House Nightrunner of Nighthold. There were also the many banners of the men of the Frozen Shore and the Ice River clans. Arya looked for a banner marked with a pair of gold cuffs marked with First Men runes on a field of brown, the banner of House Giantspan of Ruddy Hall, but she could not see it. What Arya did see was a banner of dark blue marked with a white mammoth skull, the banner of House Raider of Hardham. They were not stopped as they approached the camp. The sentries that guarded the camp simply watched them enter, probably because of the Arryn banner they flew, identifying them as allies. As they made their way through the camp of Northmen and Spearwives, people began to gawk and stare and crowd as they saw Nymeria, gathering along the path as they trotted towards the twins, many murmuring and muttering about Nymeria and a few saying Arya's name and others saying Sansa's as they spotted her sitting on the saddle. It was clear that many assumed her to be a Stark as she had a direwolf at her side, but it seemed they were not sure which one of Ned Stark's daughters she was. Eventually, they drew close to the gates of the twins where many northern men came out to greet them, some Arya recognized from when they visited Winterfell. Clearly, word of their arrival had been passed along the camp all the way to the twins ahead of their arrival. At the head of the group was a man not from beyond the wall but definitely a northerner, Sir Helman Tallheart, one of the few to bear the title of Knight in the North, like Sir Roderick. He had visited Winterfell a few times and Arya knew him. He was baffled and wide-eyed as he spotted Arya sitting on Lothar Brun's saddle. "Lady, Princess Arya," he stumbled as he saw her sitting. "Sir Helman," Arya greeted, her voice full of joy. Brun helped Arya down from her saddle and she raced towards Sir Helman, overjoyed to see someone else that she knew, someone from her homeland like Nymeria. Even though Aunt Lysa and Robert Arryn were kin, she did not know them, not as she knew Sir Helman. As Arya approached, Sir Helman pulled his cloak back and dropped to his knees, taking Arya's hand and holding her wrist to his brow. "The hearts of the North will weigh a little lighter when word of your safety is spread," he declared in the boisterous tone he was so well known for. "I had not thought to see you here, Princess. We thought you were a captive of the Lannisters." Arya's face darkened. "I escaped when they attacked my father's men. I hid amongst the streets of King's Landing, then I was found and smuggled out by Lord Baelish," Arya declared, looking over to Littlefinger still sitting on his horse. Eyes of the northern lords turned to Littlefinger. "We escaped to the Vale, to her aunt Lady Lysa at the Eyrie. Now I am taking her south to Riverrun to reunite with her mother and brother," Baelish explained. "And why would the Master of Coin for the Lannister king help us?" asked Sir Helman in a tone of accusation. "I was Master of Coin for King Robert. When Robert was killed, Lord Stark and I worked to remove Joffrey and his mother from power after discovering the truth about them. When Lord Stark was betrayed, he insisted to me in secret that I play the part of Joffrey's ally until I could arrange an escape for him and his daughters, for I could not help anyone if I were in a cell." A crude overview of what he had explained to Arya on the ship, but accurate. "After Lord Stark was murdered, I tried to get both the Stark girls home, but I was unable to rescue Sansa and was forced to flee with young Arya before the Lannisters discovered my true allegiance." The Northerners did not seem sure how to respond to what Littlefinger was telling them, but nothing that he had said seemed to be a deception thus far. Each of the Northern lords took turns greeting and paying homage to Arya. "Styr the Magna of the Thans, Jerick of House Redbeard, Alfin of House Crowcloak, Soren of House Shieldbreaker, the Lord of Bones, Morna of House White Mask, Asen of House Ishiagzu, Divin of House Sealskinner and others." Among them was a slender man of middling height but broader in the chest and shoulders. His long hair seemed mostly grey but had hints of brown and possessed a sharp face with shrewd brown eyes. He clad himself in black ringmail and shaggy fur breeches over wool and leather and a long tattered cloak of black cloth and red silk. Under his arm, he carried a first men helm of bronze and iron with raven wings at each temple. Mance Rayder, Lord of Hardham, Princess, he introduced himself as he paid homage. Arya had heard stories about Mance from her brothers, her uncle and her father. An honorable man and an old friend of Arya's family. According to legend, the House of Rayder was formed thousands of years ago by a wilderling woman and a former brother of the Night's Watch after the Watch was disbanded and the lands beyond the wall were brought into the Northern Kingdom by King Brandon the Unifier. There were also northern lords from below the wall there other than Sir Helman. The first Arya noticed were the pale grey eyes of Roose Bolton, a scary man to behold. There was also Harlys Hornwood and Meja Cruin, both of whom had fought alongside Lord Bolton at the Green Fork and narrowly escaped. The last to pay tribute was one not at the twins who made his way across the camp, a great giant flanked by two other giants. The three giants knelt before Arya and bowed their heads. They spoke in the old tongue, offering her homage like all the rest. The lead giant was Mag March Tundoweg, or Mag the Mighty, their leader. Arya was too young to remember him when he last visited Winterfell, but Jon, Robb and Theon spoke very highly of him, recounting him playing with them in the courtyard of Winterfell. Arya bowed and responded in the old tongue, thanking Mag for his homage. When Arya received all tributes from the Northmen, she was led into the twins by Sir Helman along with Nymeria and Littlefinger. Inside the twins, she met what felt like 1,000 Freys, but not the old Lord Walder who they claimed was preoccupied. Arya was brought to a long table in the hall where the northern lords and several Freys joined her. She was brought a bowl of soup and her brothers Bannerman watched her eat, elated to see her alive and well. Nymeria sat under the table and was given a bowl of soup of her own at Arya's request, and for the first time in a long time, Arya felt truly safe. Arya explained her story and all she had been through since her father's arrest. Arya's account of her father's murder at the September of Baelor made many of the Northmen angry and grim, sharing Arya's hatred for Joffrey. When she was done, she asked the lords to tell her all that had happened since she'd left the Eyrie. "I am afraid not much has changed," Lord Mance explained, gesturing to one of the Freys to bring them a map. "No major battles have been fought since our victory at the Riverrun. Tywin holds at Harrenhal with his host, the mountain marauds across the Riverlands, and several of our Riverlord comrades have been retaking their castles from the Lannister occupiers," Mance explained, pointing to places on the map when it was brought to the table. "After our defeat at the Green Fork, we pulled back here to the twins to await orders," Lord Hornwood explained. "When your Aunt Lysa's host of Vale Knights arrived, half went on to Riverrun to join your brother, the king. The other half remain here with our forces," Lord Bolton declared. "After assembling our forces from beyond the wall at the Night Fort, we travelled south and were joined at Winterfell by the Scattersea and their unicorn cavalry. When we reached Greywater Watch, we sent all our horses, the unicorns and our fastest giant on ahead to join the king in Riverrun." Tormund Giantsbane led the host, Lord Mance explained. Now Arya understood why the banners of Ruddy Hall and Lord Tormund were nowhere to be found. "Are they there now?" asked Littlefinger, looking over the map. Lord Bolton shook his head. "The king departed Riverrun shortly after Lord Giantsbane and his cavalry arrived. His Grace has left a force with his uncles Sir Edmure and Benjen while the king and his men make for the Golden Tooth in the west." "The Golden Tooth?" Arya repeated, not sure why Robb would go there. "Tywin's good brother, Stafford Lannister, has been raising a host in the Westerlands to challenge us. Robb is leading his host to engage them," Mance explained. "Some of our force from beyond the wall will hold here with the Freys, the Valyman and the Northmen under Lord Bolton, ready to engage Tywin Lannister if he marches north from Harrenhal to attack the Vale or the twins. Meanwhile, the rest of us will continue south to join Sir Edmure and Benjen at Riverrun and reclaim the remainder of the Riverlands from the Lannisters." "Is my mother there?" asked Arya. "Alas, she is not, Princess. We received word that shortly before the king marched for the Golden Tooth, he first dispatched Lady Catelyn and Theon Greyjoy. Your mother rides south to parley with King Renly and barter some kind of alliance against the Lannisters. Greyjoy, on the other hand, has set sail from Seaguard to the Iron Islands to request aid from his father, Lord Bolon. What King Stannis is doing, none of us can say. Since he dispatched his words of King Joffrey's incest nature, he has gone silent. Littlefinger nodded his head and tapped the table. The sellswords and Vale Knights I have with me will join you on the road to Riverrun. Before leaving King's Landing I dispatched many of my friends to position themselves in useful places. They will undoubtedly be able to provide us with information once I am able to coordinate with them from Riverrun, Littlefinger stated. You mean spies? And what, pray tell, does the dead King's banker need spies for? Asked Mance. Littlefinger smiled. There are very few in King's Landing who are trustworthy, least of all the eunuch. I made a habit of forming my own network to collect information for me, if only to check the validity of Lord Varys' words. I find that a wealth of knowledge far outweighs a wealth of gold. Now I will pledge that knowledge to our king, of course, Littlefinger declared. One of the Free Knights cleared his throat and began to speak. We can arrange for an honor guard to take the princess back to Winterfell to join her brothers. I will speak to my father. I'm going to Riverrun, Arya declared outright, claiming the attention of all those gathered. Princess, we are at war, one of the other Freys declared. My mother was in Riverrun a few days ago and now she's gone even further south without an army. I will go to Riverrun and wait for my mother and brother there. My uncle Benjen is there, he knows me. If he decides to send me back to Winterfell before Robb or my mother returns, I will go back, but unless he does so, I'm going to wait there for my family, Arya declared. The gathered nobles looked to one another, unsure what to say. Some of the northerners seemed impressed with Arya. I did promise before the gods that I would not leave the girl's side until I returned her to her family, Littlefinger declared, though Arya never heard him mention such a promise. Littlefinger has said to Arya on the ship from King's Landing that he needed her help to convince her mother and brother not to have him killed. That was his true reason for wishing to take her south. I will deliver her to her uncle Benjen in Riverrun and he can decide where she is to go. The battlefield is no place for Arya nor her mother, and perhaps once she has Arya once again, Lady Catelyn might be swayed to take Arya back to Winterfell to be with her brothers. The lords and knights exchanged looks, none claiming the authority to declare otherwise, and so it became settled that Arya would join them on the march to Riverrun. Chapter 16, Ironborn but Northern Raised. Chapter text. Theon's return to Pike was not as he had expected it to be, not as he had wished it. Theon set out from Riverrun to Seaguard with Lord Jason Mallister and his son Sir Patrek, the latter whom Theon fought alongside in Robb's battle guard. Theon and Sir Patrek got on very well during the journey, but his father seemed a bit wary of him. After arriving at Seaguard, Theon boarded the Myroham and set out for his home, the Iron Islands. There was no safe anchorage at Pike, but Theon Greyjoy wished to look on his father's castle from the sea, to see it as he had seen it last, 10 years before, when Robert Baratheon's war galley had borne him away to be a ward of Eddard Stark. What Theon saw when he returned seemed different, smaller, lesser somehow. The shore was all sharp rocks and glowering cliffs, and the castle seemed one with the rest, its towers and walls and bridges quarried from the same grey-black stone, wet by the same salt waves, festooned with the same spreading patches of dark green lichen, speckled by the droppings of the same seabirds. The point of land on which the Greyjoys had raised their fortress had once thrust like a sword into the bowels of the ocean, but the waves had hammered at it day and night until the land broke and shattered. Thousands of years passed. All that remained were 3 bare and barren islands and a dozen towering stacks of rock that rose from the water like the pillars of some sea god's temple, while the angry waves foamed and crashed among them. Drear, dark, forbidding, Pike stood atop those islands and pillars, almost a part of them, its curtain wall closing off the headland around the foot of the great stone bridge that leapt from the cliff top to the largest islet, dominated by the massive bulk of the Great Keep. Farther out were the Kitchen Keep and the Bloody Keep, each on its own island. Towers and outbuildings clung to the stacks beyond, linked to each other by covered archways when the pillars stood close, by long swaying walks of wood and rope when they did not. The sea tower rose from the outmost island at the point of the broken sword, the oldest part of the castle, round and tall, the sheer-sided pillar on which it stood half eaten through by the endless battering of the waves. The base of the tower was white from centuries of salt spray, the upper stories green from the lichen that crawled over it like a thick blanket, the jagged crown black with soot from its nightly watchfire. Above the sea tower snapped his father's banner. The Myroham was too far off for Theon to see more than the cloth itself, but he knew the device it bore, the golden crooken of House Greyjoy, arms writhing and reaching against a black field. The banner streamed from an iron mast, shivering and twisting as the wind gusted, like a bird struggling to take flight. and here at least the dire wolf of Stark did not fly above, casting its shadow down upon the Greyjoy Kraken. It looked not like a great menacing castle as Theon had perceived it when it vanished into the distance from the railing of Robert's war galley. It looked more like a ruin, a grim and dreary place like Moat Cailin. Truthfully, Theon expected more from his homeland since the time he was last there. When Robert Baratheon took Pike and Theon, the Ironborn were commanded to once and for all forsake the old way. The old way, Theon thought, when the Ironborn lived by the axe instead of the pick, taking rather than building. In those days, the Ironborn did not work mines, that was labor for the captives brought back from the hostings, and so to the business of farming and tending goats and sheep. War was an Iron Man's proper trade. The drowned god, Vigar had made them to reave and rape, to carve out kingdoms and write their names in fire and blood and song. As a child growing up in Winterfell, Theon praised the old way, thinking it the only true way to live. A man gained when he took what he would, be it wealth, women, or glory. Sir Roderick would scold him, Mayor Stillowin would lecture him, but it was Lord Stark who took him to the Godswood, sat with him and talked with him. Lord Stark told him how the old way was once the way of all the first men, and it was the old way they clung to in their wars against the children of the forest and the giants. To buy with coin was considered a dishonor, and true wealth was acquired by taking from the slain. The bronze price they called it back then, now it was the iron price. It was not until the pact between men and the children that the first men changed, grew and became truly strong. Rather than accumulating wealth through murder and delegate hard work to slaves, they learned to build and work and make things that would last. After abandoning the old way, the first men remained a warrior people, but no longer marauders and looters. They became a people of honor, strength and hard work, and those who refused to change their ways were driven to the Iron Islands, and from that the Ironborn were created. In the north, the iron price was how a man won a trophy in battle. It was not considered the only dignified way to claim a possession as the Ironborn would have it. Aegon the Dragon had destroyed the old way when he burned Black Harren, gave Harren's kingdom back to the Rivermen, and reduced the Iron Islands to an insignificant backwater. Yet the old red tales were still told around driftwood fires and smoky hearths all across the islands, even behind the high stone halls of Pike. Theon's father numbered among his titles the style of Lord Reaper, and the Greyjoy words boasted that we do not sow. Lord Stark told Theon that the Ironborn had never truly given up the old way, and that is why they never made their mark upon the world. The great lords of Westeros paid them no mind, not until their raids made enough noise become a nuisance, and then they were swatted down. Lord Stark told Theon, the Ironborn knew nothing of building strength or power, only how to steal it or loot it from those who did. It had been to bring back the old way more than for the empty vanity of a crown that Lord Balon had staged his great rebellion and had been swatted down the same as all others who had come before him. The Myroham made anchor at the village of Lord Sport that sat just the stronghold of the Botleys. When he was a boy it had been timber and wattle, but Robert Baratheon had razed that structure to the ground. Lord Sylwain had rebuilt in stone, for now, a small square keep crowned the hill. Pale green flags drooped from the squat corner towers, each emblazoned with a shoal of silvery fish. While now made of stone, it was a sad and small little structure. In truth, there were windmills in the north fashioned by farmers with more effort and better craftsmanship, and Lord Stark's dismissal of the Ironborn continued to ring true in Theon's ears. What Theon could say actually were well built were the ships. Among the masts of countless fishing boats, he spied a Tiroshi trading galley offloading beside a lumbering Ebenese cog with her black-tarred hull. A great number of longships, 50 or 60 at the least, stood out to sea or lay beached on the pebbled shore to the north. Some of the sails bore devices from the other islands. The Blood Moon of Wynch, Lord Goodbrother's banded black warhorn, Harlaw's silver scythe. Theon searched for his uncle Euron's silence. Of that lean and terrible red ship, he saw no sign, but his father's great kraken was there, her bow ornamented with a grey iron ram in the shape of its namesake. Had Lord Balon anticipated him and called the Greyjoy banners? His hand went inside his cloak again, to the oilskin pouch. No one knew of his letter but Robb Stark. They were no fools, to entrust their secrets to a bird. Still, Lord Balon was no fool either. He might well have guessed why his son was coming home at long last and acted accordingly. It might be only a caution, now that he thought on it. A defensive move, lest the war spill out across the sea. Old men were cautious by nature. His father was old now, and so too was his uncle Victorian, who commanded the Iron Fleet. His uncle Euron was a different song, to be sure, but the silence did not seem to be in port. It's all for the good, Theon told himself. This way, I shall be able to strike all the more quickly. When the Myraham made her way to port, Theon paced the deck restlessly, scanning the shore. He had not thought to find Lord Bolon himself at quayside, but surely his father would have sent someone to meet him. Silas Sourmouth the steward, Lord Botley, perhaps even Dagmar Clefture. It would be good to look at Dagmar's hideous old face again. It was not as though they had no word of his arrival. Robb had sent ravens from Riverrun, and when they'd found no longship at Seaguard, Jason Mallister had sent his own birds to Pike, supposing that Robb's were lost. Yet he saw no familiar faces, no honor guard waiting to escort him from Lord Sport to Pike, only small folk going about their small business. Shore hands rolled casks of wine off the Tiroshi trader, fisherfolk cried the day's catch, and children ran and played. A priest in the seawater robes of the drowned god was leading a pair of horses along the pebbled shore, while above him a slattern leaned out a window in the inn, calling out to some passing Ebenese sailors. When Theon tried to commission a horse to make for Pike from the innkeeper from the railing of the ship, the priest of Vigar who was leading the two horses stopped him. "Your boy will not be needed," the priest said, "nor your horse. I shall see my nephew back to his father's house." As the man approached, the small folk bent the knee, and Theon heard the innkeeper murmur, "Damn fair." Tall and thin, with fierce black eyes and a beak of a nose, the priest was garbed in mottled robes of green and grey and blue, the swirling colours of Vigar, the drowned god. A waterskin hung under his arm on a leather strap, and ropes of dried seaweed were braided through his waist-long black hair and an untrimmed beard. A memory prodded at Theon. In one of his rare-curt letters, Lord Bolon had written of his youngest brother going down in a storm, and turning holy when he washed up safe on shore. "Uncle Aaron," he said doubtfully. "Nephew Theon," the priest replied. "Your lord father bid me fetch you. Come." After fetching his things, Theon took to the pier and hurried after his uncle. Theon caught him with a dozen long strides. "I had not looked for you, uncle. After 10 years, I thought perhaps my lord father and lady mother might come themselves, or send Dagmar with an honor guard. It is not for you to question the commands of the Lord Reaper of Pike." The priest's manner was chilly, most unlike the man Theon remembered. Aaron Greyjoy had been the most amiable of his uncles, feckless and quick to laugh, fond of songs, ale, and women. As to Dagmar, the Clefture is gone to old Wyk at your father's behest, to roost the stone houses and the drums. To what purpose? Why are the longships hosting? Why have longships ever hosted? His uncle had left the horses tied up in front of the waterside inn. To war then? Theon asked his uncle in the old tongue, not sure if such knowledge was made public in Lord Sport yet and didn't want to blurt anything out in case of a Lannister spy that might have sought passage on one of the Essozi ships. Damfair turned to Theon at once with knitted eyebrows and what seemed to be a surprised expression. "You speak the old tongue of our forebears?" Aaron asked in the same language. Theon smirked and shrugged. "Of course. I have been in the north these past years, all are raised to speak the old tongue and trained as great warriors there," Theon replied. Aaron's eyes darted around for a moment as he seemed lost in thought. "Tell me true, nephew. What gods do you pray to now?" his uncle asked. "Our gods, the true gods, and as Ironborn I pray to none more so than our drowned lord, Vigar." Theon was proud of it and had never strayed from his worship of the old gods, but he was not avid in prayer as most of the Stark children he was raised alongside, though he'd not say that to a priest. "And you pray to the drowned god, as a tree?" Aaron asked, his words reverting to the common tongue. Theon now saw where he had gone wrong. Vigar and many of the old gods were worshipped by the first men when they came to Westeros, and the rest of the old gods were worshipped separately by the children of the forest and the giants through the wirewood trees. It was not until the pact and the unity of the peoples then the gods came together into one pantheon. The Ironborn rejected the children of the forest and the use of wirewood trees for worship. Theon forced a laugh, trying to hide his nervousness. "Uncle, Vigar is the god of the tides and seas, the drowned god, the Kraken god, of course. He is not a tree. The wirewood trees are simply a few of the many altars that are used in the north to pray to him." Aaron studied Theon's face and grumbled, either in reluctant approval or dismay. "Kneel," Damfair commanded. Without hesitation, Theon dropped to the ground covered in stone and mud. He had a purpose here and might need Aaron's help to achieve it. A crown was worth a little mud and horse shit on his breeches, he supposed. Bow your head. Lifting the skin, his uncle pulled the cork and directed a thin stream of seawater down upon Theon's head. It drenched his hair and ran over his forehead into his eyes. Sheets washed down his cheeks, and a finger crept under his cloak and doublet and down his back, a cold rivulet along his spine. The salt made his eyes burn until it was all he could do not to cry out. He could taste the ocean on his lips. "Let Theon your servant be born again from the sea, as you were Aaron Greyjoy," intoned in the old tongue. "Bless him with salt, bless him with stone, bless him with steel." "Nephew, do you still know the words?" "What is dead may never die," Theon said in the old tongue, remembering. He'd only ever heard the words spoken in the common tongue when he lived on Pike, but Theon simply thought it because he was too young to learn the old tongue. "What is dead may never die," his uncle echoed, "but rises again, harder and stronger. Stand." Theon stood, blinking back tears from the salt in his eyes. Wordless, his uncle corked the waterskin, untied his horse, and mounted. Theon did the same. They set off together, leaving the inn and the harbour behind them, up past the castle of Lord Botley into the stony hills. The priest ventured no further word. "I have been half my life away from home," Theon ventured at last. "Will I find the islands changed?" Theon looked around Lord Sport once again and pondered if all the Iron Islands was as dismal and crude in fashion. Men fish the sea, dig in the earth, and die. Women birth children in blood and pain and die. Night follows day. The winds and tides remain. The islands are as our God made them. Gods, he has grown grim, Theon thought. Will I find my sister and my lady mother at Pike? You will not. Your mother dwells on Harlaw, with her own sister. It is less raw there, and her cough troubles her. Your sister has taken Black Wind to Great Wyk, with messages from your Lord Father. She will return ere long, you may be sure. Theon did not need to be told that Black Wind was Asher's longship. He had not seen his sister in 10 years, but that much he knew of her. Odd that she would call it that when Robb Stark had a wolf named Grey Wind. "Stark is grey and Greyjoy's black," he murmured, smiling, "but it seems we're both windy." The priest had nothing to say to that. "And what of you, uncle?" Theon asked. "You were no priest when I was taken from Pike. I remember how you would sing the old reaving songs standing on the table with a horn of ale in hand." "Young I was, and vain," Aaron Greyjoy said, "but the sea washed my follies and my vanities away." "That man drowned, nephew. His lungs filled with sea water, and the fish ate the scales off his eyes. When I rose again, I saw clearly." Theon pondered if his uncle were giving to a flight of fancy or if he had gone mad. Theon had liked what he remembered of the old Aaron Greyjoy. "Uncle, why has my father called his swords and sails?" Theon did not just depart the Myroham as a boy returning home, he was a commander in the armies of the North heralding a message from his king, and he needed to know what the Iron Islands intended to do. "The blood of Calder would not make us any closer," Robb had said as Theon heard him scold his mother from around the corner of the hall in Riverrun. "Doubtless he will tell you at Pike. I would know his plans now. From me, you shall not. We are commanded not to speak of this to any man. Even to me." Theon's anger flared. He'd led men in war, hunted with a king, won honor in Tony Melise, ridden with Brynden the Blackfish and Great Jon Umber, fought in the Whispering Wood and beneath the walls of Riverrun, bedded more girls than he could name, and yet this uncle was treating him as though he were still a child of 10. "If my father makes plans for war, I must know of them. I am not any man, I am heir to Pike and the Iron Islands." As to that, his uncle said, "We shall see." The words were a slap in the face. "We shall see. My brothers are both dead. I am my Lord Father's only living son. Your sister lives." Asher, he thought, confounded. She was 3 years older than Theon and from the sounds of things a respected mariner. Theon had fought side by side with the Mormont spearwives, and he knew that half the women in the north was trained in warfare, as per tradition, but the male laws of succession were still adhered to. Would Theon really lose his claim? As much as it broke Theon to admit it, while Theon had been a hostage in the north, Asher was at Pike, being raised Ironborn. "That remains to be seen," Uncle Theon insisted loudly. "I am a man grown, studied in rulership and a warrior tested in battle. I will not be cheated of my rights, I warn you." His uncle grunted. You warn a servant of the drowned god, boy. You have forgotten more than you know. And you are a great fool if you believe your lord father will ever hand these holy islands over to a Stark. Now be silent. The ride is long enough without your magpie chatterings. Theon held his tongue, though not without struggle. So that is the way of it, he thought. Theon minded not that he was regarded as a Stark. Robb had treated him as much lately. Lord Eddard had raised him among his own children and Theon was proud of it, but he was still a Greyjoy. There were few in the north who let him forget it. The many in the castle, from Lady Stark to the lowliest kitchen scullion, knew he was hostage to his father's good behavior, and treated him accordingly. Though in his youth, Lord Stark always remained the man who'd brought blood and fire to Pike and taken him from his home, over time he became like a father to him, though his wife was, if anything, a distant and suspicious woman. If it hadn't been for Snow, Theon would probably rank as Lady Catelyn's most despised person in the castle. Theon doted on the Stark children, his brothers and sisters, every one of them. Theon, Robb and Jon were like triplets, seldom apart for all their day. The brooding bastard Jon was the closest Theon had for a rival, though they were still close friends. Whether it was sword fighting, archery, riding, they'd always compete and jape at one another. It was almost as though they felt whichever of the two of them ended up the best would win the affections of Robb or Lord Stark, or would be the least hated by Lady Catelyn. In Pike, it would seem, the old wars were still being fought. That ought not surprise him. The Iron Islands lived in the past, the present was too hard and bitter to be borne. Besides, his father and uncles were old, and the old lords were like that, they took their dusty feuds to the grave, forgetting nothing and forgiving less. Did they really cling to impoverishment and simplicity out of spite for the changing of the ways? No, Theon thought. The Ironborn were a warrior people, strong and hard people. They remained as they were because they needed no coddling, nothing gilded, everything was rough and harsh because the Ironborn were strong, that had to be it. The path they rode wound up and up, into bare and stony hills. Soon they were out of sight of the sea, though the smell of salt still hung sharp in the damp air. They kept a steady plodding pace, past a shepherd's croft and the abandoned workings of a mine. This new, holy Aeron Greyjoy was not much for talk. They rode in a gloom of silence. Finally, Theon could suffer it no longer. Robb Stark is Lord of Winterfell now, he said. Aeron rode on. One wolf is much like the other. Robb has broken fealty with the Iron Throne and was crowned as king by the North, the Riverlands and the Vale. There's war. The Maestus ravens fly over salt as soon as rock. This news is old and cold. It means a new day, uncle. Every morning brings a new day, much like the old. Theon had suffered quite enough of his uncle's gloom. He put his spurs into his horse and trotted on ahead, smiling. It was nigh on sunset when they reached the walls of Pike, a crescent of dark stone that ran from cliff to cliff, with the gatehouse in the center and 3 square towers to either side. Theon could still make out the scars left by the stones of Robert Baratheon's catapults. A new south tower had risen from the ruins of the old, its stone a paler shade of grey, and as yet unmarred by patches of lichen. That was where Robert had made his breach, swarming in over the rubble and corpses with his warhammer in hand and Ned Stark at his side. Theon had watched from the safety of the sea tower, and sometimes he still saw the torches in his dreams and heard the dull thunder of the collapse. The gates stood open to him, the rusted iron portcullis drawn up. The guards atop the battlements watched with strangers' eyes as Theon Greyjoy came home at last. Beyond the curtain wall were 100 acres of headland hard against the sky and the sea. The stables were here, and the kennels, and a scatter of other outbuildings. Sheep and swine huddled in their pens while the castle dogs ran free. To the south were the cliffs, and the white stone bridge to the great keep. Theon could hear the crashing of waves as he swung down from his saddle. A stableman came to take his horse. A pair of gaunt children and some thralls stared at him with dull eyes, but there was no sign of his lord father, nor anyone else he recalled from boyhood. A bleak and bitter homecoming, he thought. The priest had not dismounted. "Will you not stay the night and share our meat and mead, uncle?" "Bring you, I was told." "You are brought. Now I return to our God's business." Aeron Greyjoy turned his horse and rode slowly out beneath the muddy spikes of the portcullis. A bent-back old crone in a shapeless grey dress approached him warily. Lord, I am sent to show you to chambers. By whose bidding? Theon asked. Your lord father, lord. So you do know who I am. Why is my father not here to greet me? He awaits you in the sea tower, lord. When you are rested from your trip. And who are you? Helyar, who keeps this castle for your lord father. Silas was steward here. They called him Sourmouth. Even now, Theon could recall the winey stench of the old man's breath. Dead these 5 years, lord. And what of Maester Cullen, where is he? He sleeps in the sea. Wendomer keeps the ravens now. It is as if I were a stranger here, Theon thought. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has changed. It will take far more than a short ride from the Lord's sport and a cold wind to render me tired. I am rested enough to see my father. Show me to him, he commanded. Bowing stiffly, she led him across the headland to the bridge. That at least was as he remembered, the ancient stones slick with spray and spotted by lichen, the sea foaming under their feet like some great wild beast, the salt wind clutching at their clothes. Theon returned to the great keep through a covered stone walkway, the echoes of his footsteps mingling with the ceaseless rumble of the sea below. To get to the sea tower on its crooked pillar, he had to cross 3 further bridges, each narrower than the one before. The last was made of rope and wood, and the wet salt wind made it sway underfoot like a living thing. Theon's heart was in his mouth by the time he was halfway across. A long way below, the waves threw up tall plumes of spray as they crashed against the rock. As a boy, he used to run across this bridge, even in the black of night. Boys believe nothing can hurt them, his doubt whispered. Grown men know better. The door was grey wood studded with iron, and Theon found it barred from the inside. He hammered on it with a fist and cursed when a splinter snagged the fabric of his glove. The wood was damp and mouldy and the iron studs were rusted. After a moment the door was opened from within by a guard in a black iron breastplate and pot helm. You are the son. Out of my way, or you'll learn who I am. The man stood aside. Theon climbed the twisting steps to the solar. He found his father seated beside a brazier, beneath a robe of musty sealskins that covered him from foot to chin. At the sound of boots on stone, the Lord of the Iron Islands lifted his eyes to behold his last living son. He was smaller than Theon remembered him. And so gaunt. Balon Greyjoy had always been thin, but now he looked as though the gods had put him in a cauldron and boiled every spare ounce of flesh from his bones until nothing remained but hair and skin. Bone-thin and bone-hard he was, with a face that might have been chipped from flint. His eyes were flinty too, black and sharp, but the years and the salt winds had turned his hair the grey of a winter sea, flecked with white caps. Unbound, it hung past the small of the back. 9 years, is it? Lord Balon said at last. 10, Theon answered, pulling off his torn gloves. A boy they took, his father said. What are you now? A man, Theon answered. Your blood and your heir. Lord Balon grunted. We shall see. You shall, Theon promised. 10 years, you say? Stark had you as long as I. And now you come as his envoy. Not his, Theon said. Lord Eddard is dead, beheaded by the Lannister queen. They are both dead, Stark and that Robert who broke my walls with his stones. I vowed I'd live to see them both in their graves, and I have. He grimaced. Yet the cold and the damp still make my joints ache, as when they were alive. So what does it serve? It serves. Theon moved closer. I bring a letter. Did Ned Stark dress you like that? His father interrupted, squinting up from beneath his robe. Theon saw no problem with his attire. He wore a studded black leather lamella over a chainmail hauberk, ringmail vambraces, a long black cloak, lined with pale fur and embroidered with the yellow crochan of his house. He dressed as he had when he rode into battle alongside the Starks. Theon shrugged. I wear my armor, father. Armor I wore into battle, twice. First at the Whispering Wood and again during the Battle of the Camps, both where I slew many men. Lord Balon snorted, and your cloak? Is that also armor? Did you wear your pretty cloak into battle when you killed many men? Asked Balon. My cloak? Yes, boy. Your pretty cloak, lined with fur and stitched with the Greyjoy sigil. Did Lord Stark dress you in it? Asked Balon. Was it his pleasure to garb you in warm furs and black cloth with pretty sewing and make you his own sweet daughter? Theon felt the blood rising to his face. I am no man's daughter. If you dislike my cloak, I will change it. You will. Throwing off the furs, Lord Baelon pushed himself to his feet. He was not as tall as Theon remembered. That cloak, was it bought with gold or iron? He had forgotten. It has been so long. In the old way, women might decorate themselves with ornaments bought with coin, but a warrior wore only decorations taken off the corpses of enemies slain by his own hand or by thralls who did their master's bidding. In the north, claiming a trophy with the iron price was all well and good, but did Lord Baelon still believe that to pay for anything bloodlessly was somehow demeaning? Baelon had never forsaken the old way. No wonder Pike and Lord Sport were in such a state, no wonder Theon's homeland seemed so beleaguered. The Ironborn were not hardy or modest men who cared nothing for luxury, they were still too proud and arrogant to put effort into building their own strength. You blush red as a maid, Theon. A question was asked. Is it the gold price you paid, or the iron? The gold, Theon admitted. Theon's brow furrowed. I am no vulture nor a leech, father, he said coldly. I take trophies and glories from my victories, I do not rely on looting corpses alone like a common grave robber to claim something as my own. Baelon seemed neither impressed nor offended by Theon's words, only stern and cold. I am a warrior of the drowned god, father, Theon asserted, speaking once again in the old tongue, hoping to win over his father by showing his respect for their ancient traditions. What came over Baelon's face was a look that Theon could only characterize as perplexed. He glared at Theon for a moment as though he saw something odd. Was he surprised that his son had been educated in the old ways so far from home? Father? Theon asked once again, his words remaining in the old tongue, but that only furthered Lord Baelon's confusion. What inane mutterings have the Starks taught you? Lord Baelon asked. Theon could not believe it, his own father, a man who prided himself on being a man of the old way, could not speak their tongue. His uncle spoke the old tongue, but not his father. I was speaking in the old tongue, the language of the first men, Theon asserted. Lord Baelon grumbled. I thought it sounded familiar. Your uncle and the other priests speak that nonsense. Are you training to be a priest of the drowned god? He asked. The look of confusion on Damfair's face when Theon first spoke in the old tongue now made sense. It seemed that on the Iron Islands, only the priests of Vigar spoke the ancient words. In the north, all children were raised to speak their words, but it seemed the same was not so for the Ironborn. It seemed the Ironborn cared for tradition and culture when it came to believing that slavery and marauding were the only dignified ways to gain power and wealth, but no further than that. If Theon never had any doubt in Lord Stark's words against the Ironborn and their ways, they had been dashed by his own father. It is as I feared. The Green Lands have made you soft, and the Starks have made you theirs. You're wrong. Ned Stark was my mentor, he fashioned a warrior out of me, but my blood is still salt and iron. Lord Baelon turned away to warm his bony hands over the brazier. Yet the Stark pup sends you to me like a well-trained raven, clutching his little message. There is nothing small about the letter I bear, Theon said, and the offer he makes is one I suggested to him. This Wolf King heeds your counsel, does he? The notion seemed to amuse Lord Baelon. He heeds me, yes. I've hunted with him, trained with him, shared meat and mead with him and walked at his side. I have earned his trust. He looks on me as his brother. No, his father jabbed a finger at his face. Not here, not in Pike, not in my hearing. You will not name him brother, this son of the man who put your true brothers to the sword. Or have you forgotten Roderick and Meryn, who were your own blood? I forget nothing. Ned Stark had killed neither of his brothers, in truth. Roderick had been slain by Lord Jason Mallister at Seaguard, Meryn crushed in the collapse of the Old South Tower, but Stark would have done for them just as quickly had the tide of battle changed to sweep them together. I remember my brothers very well, Theon insisted. Chiefly he remembered Roderick's drunken cuffs and Meryn's cruel japes and endless lies. I remember when my father was a king too. He took out Robb's letter and thrust it forward. Here. Read it. Your Grace. Lord Baelon broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. His black eyes flicked back and forth. So the boy would give me a crown again, he said, and all I need do is destroy his enemies. His thin lips twisted in a smile. By now Robb is at the Golden Tooth, Theon said. Once it falls, he'll be through the hills in a day. Lord Tywin's host is at Harrenhal, cut off from the west. The Kingslayer is a captive at Riverrun. Only Sir Stafford Lannister and the raw green levies he's been gathering remain to oppose Robb in the west. Sir Stafford will put himself between Robb's army and Lannisport, which means the city will be undefended when we descend on it by sea. If the gods are with us, even Casterly Rock itself may fall before the Lannisters so much as realize that we are upon them. Lord Bolon grunted. Casterly Rock has never fallen. Until now. Theon smiled. And how sweet that will be. His father did not return the smile. So this is why Robb Stark sends you back to me, after so long. So you might win my consent to this plan of his. It is my plan, not Robb's, Theon said proudly. Mine, as the victory will be mine, and in time the crown. I will lead the attack myself if it pleases you. As my reward, I would ask that you grant me Casterly Rock for my own seat, once we have taken it from the Lannisters. With the rock, he could hold Lannisport and the golden lands of the west. It would mean wealth and power such as House Greyjoy had never known. You reward yourself handsomely for a notion and a few lines of scribbling. His father read the letter again. The pup says nothing about a reward. Only that you speak for him, and I am to listen, and give him my sails and swords, and in return, he will give me a crown. His flinty eyes lifted to meet his son's. He will give me a crown, he repeated, his voice growing sharp. A poor choice of words. What is meant is. What is meant is what is said. The boy will give me a crown. And what is given can be taken away. Lord Bolon tossed the letter onto the brazier, atop the necklace. The parchment curled, blackened, and took flame. Theon was aghast. Have you gone mad? His father laid a stinging backhand across his cheek. Mind your tongue. You are not in Winterfell now, and I am not Robb the boy, that you should speak to me so. I am the Greyjoy, Lord Reaper of Pike, King of Salt and Rock, son of the Sea Wind, and no man gives me a crown. I pay the iron price. I will take my crown, as Aron Red Hand did 5,000 years ago. Theon edged backward, away from the sudden fury in his father's tone. Take it, then he spat, his cheek still tingling. Call yourself King of the Iron Islands, no one will care, until the wars are over, and the victor looks about and spies the old fool perched off his shore with an iron crown on his head. Lord Bolon laughed. Well, at the least you are no craven. No more than I'm a fool. Do you think I gather my ships to watch them rock at anchor? I mean to carve out a kingdom with fire and sword, but not from the west, and not at the bidding of King Robb the boy. Casterly Rock is too strong, and Lord Tywin too cunning by half. We might take Lannisport, but we should never keep it. No, I hunger for a different plum, not so juicy sweet, to be sure, yet it hangs there ripe and undefended. Where? Theon might have asked, but by then he knew. Lord Bolon meant to sack the north. You craven! Theon shouted to his father. Better men than you. True believers in the old gods. True believers in the drowned god. They fight for liberation from the Iron Throne and they are succeeding where you have failed. Now you would sack their homes while they war against Tywin Lannister. You cower from a real fight and turn to the undefended to make a prize out of. Bolon lifted his arm but Theon clutched the hilt of his sword, showing that he was not afraid of his father. You may rant and rave about the iron price and you may mouth the name of the drowned god with no regard for what it means. You do not speak our tongue. You lack all honor. You are no warrior, only an old fool who mocks the gods he claims to serve. Theon had no doubt in his mind that his words would most likely make him lose his birthright forever. Bolon would give Asher the Iron Islands without a second thought now and there was nothing that Theon could do to change it, but Theon however was not sure if that was a bad thing now. Since he was a child he dreamed of all the great things he'd do with the Iron Islands, but what could he make of the beleaguered hobble of marauders and cutthroats who knew nothing of honor or true tradition? In the north, Theon was respected by the lords he fought alongside. In the north he lived in a great castle ruled by those who loved Theon regardless of how he got his cloaks. Robb was a true king and Bolon was not. Years ago you led the Ironborn into a foolish war that you could not possibly win. Now that you have been offered the means to take the Westerlands with the aid of 3 strong kingdoms, you knock it away and lead them into another war they can't win. I will not let you lead my people to ruin again. Theon declared. Bolon laughed and returned to his seat, paying Theon no mind. "And how do you intend to stop me, boy? I rule this castle. I rule these islands. I am their king, not you." Theon was consumed with rage. Balon was a cold and rude man, everything Lord Eddard was not. Balon judged Theon whereas Lord Stark asked Theon for nothing and only ever offered. Theon's brothers were despicable vermin from what he could remember, but Robb, Jon, Bran and Rickon were loved by him. Theon thought of Bran and Rickon alone in Winterfell, set upon by Ironborn besieging them. Theon could not have it, he would not have it. "Then I will take the Iron Islands with the iron price," Theon declared, drawing his sword. "Face me, old man." Theon beckoned his father as he pointed his sword to Lord Balon. Balon glanced at him. "You would slay your father, boy?" asked Balon. "My real father died in King's Landing," Theon declared. Balon glared at Theon for a moment and then waved his hand in the air. "Seize him," he grumbled. Before Theon could react, his father's guard grappled Theon and wrestled his sword from his hand. "Is this your king? A coward who won't fight his own battles?" Theon asked his captors, but none listened to him. "Disarm him and take him to his chambers and lock him up," Balon commanded. "Fight me." "Why won't you fight me, coward?" Theon shouted at his father. "And no supper until he learns to behave," Balon mocked as Theon was dragged from the hall, the guards laughing at him, and Theon could do nothing but bellow in rage. Chapter 17, Finding Another Way. Chapter text. Robb sat atop his horse on a shallow hill, watching their great host of soldiers trot along the path. At Robb's side was Jon atop his own horse, and their direwolves Grey Wind and Ghost standing proudly with them. Robb had spent the better part of the day at the head of the train of his army, talking with Sir Stephen Free, who accompanied him as they rode on towards the Golden Tooth. Just as he had done on the march from Moat Cailin to the Whispering Wood, Robb chose a different noble to join him at the head of the army for the day. When Robb spotted the hill, he begged Sir Stephen to give Robb and Jon leave to inspect the army from the hill, while Sir Stephen continued to lead their men from the front. The ever amiable and gracious Sir Stephen took no slight at Robb's request and agreed. Robb's request to take to the hill with Jon was not in truth about inspecting the army, nor was it any kind of attempt to escape Sir Stephen, who Robb had respect for. It was instead a way of getting Jon alone where the two could talk without Robb voicing his current state of indecisiveness to his bannermen. "The Golden Tooth is a strong castle," Robb declared. "It may not be big, but it's built within the mountain pass where the Riverlands meet the Westerlands. It uses the mountain pass to its advantage. We can't envelop it, we can't get behind it, we can only attack it head-on." Jon glanced over to Robb and back to the army. "We outnumber whatever garrisons they possess." "We have 9,000 men," Jon reminded his brother. When Robb set out from Riverrun, he left his footmen and giants behind and took his mounted host comprised of 6,000 from the Northerners and Rivermen who fought with him at the Whispering Woods and the camps, 1,000 of the Knights of the Vale led by the Bronze Yone, and 2,000 from the horses and Skagga unicorns that were sent south ahead of Mance Rayder's second host. "We've never been tested in a siege before. Thus far we've only met our enemies in the open field. Besides, the castle is tucked up on the high slopes of the gap, so we won't be able to use rams or towers. To take the Golden Tooth, we will need trade buckets and catapults, and even if we brought giants, it would take weeks for them to fashion," Robb declared. "The castle may be up on the slopes of the gap, but the river road is on the valley bed. We have horses and unicorns, we can press on down the road in the night to Oxcross and leave the Golden Tooth untouched," Jon suggested. "The Leffords will hail arrows down upon us from their parapets while we funnel our army through the pass. We'll suffer many casualties and the Leffords will come up behind us and attack from the rear. We'd take many losses before we even reached Oxcross," said Robb. Jon shook his head and looked out to the army again, not sure what to say to Robb. Robb did not blame him, for he too was lost. "What possessed me?" Robb pondered as he watched his men ride along. Among Robb's cavalry were Northmen with fur pelts and shirts of studded leathers and mail mounted atop unicorns. Not pale white horned horses like in the stories, real unicorns were more goat than horse. Large horse-sized creatures with brown fur, they had long faces similar to both a horse and a goat, shaggy manes like lions, pointed up ears, horizontally slit blue eyes, thin long muscular legs, a thick long lock of hair dangling from their chins and a long curved brown horn protruding from their brows. They were saddled and armored and ridden like steeds, and their riders carried lances and round or kite shields marked with the houses of the Isle of Skagos. Seated upon a horse further down the train, leading mounted men from beyond the wall, was Tormund Giantsbane, an old friend of the Stark boys. Although not tall, Tormund had a broad chest, a massive belly and a beard white as snow. On his massive arms, he wears golden bands engraved with runes of the first men, an heirloom of his house. Tormund was armored with heavy ringmail and wore a long fur cloak. When Tormund came to Winterfell a few years ago, Robb had never seen a man hug his father so violently nor so joyously. He was very fond of Tormund, who played games with him and Jon and pretended to be a White Walker coming to snatch them and chase them around the courtyard. When he arrived at Riverrun with the advanced guard from the second host, he was greeted first by the great Jon. They called one another every curse word imaginable in the old tongue and the common as they laughed and hugged. When Robb and Jon went to greet him, they were tackled into embraces by Torred and Dormund, two of his sons who joined him. Big tall red-haired warriors who had befriended Robb, Jon and Theon when they visited Winterfell with their father. Now they both served as part of Robb's battle guard. As the army marched on by, Robb continued to question himself, disbelieving at how foolishly he'd backed himself into a corner. Upon hearing that Stafford Lannister was building a force of men in the Westerlands, Robb all too hastily marched out to challenge them, deciding to take the Golden Tooth and then take Stafford at Oxcross where he was training men. How foolish could Robb have been? He didn't consider how much of a trial it would be to take the Golden Tooth alone. Perhaps Robb's victories at the Whispering Wood and the camps had made him arrogant and reckless. 2 victories do not make you a conqueror, the Kingslayer had warned him. Perhaps it was his mother and Theon's departure that made him so reckless. His mother traveled south to meet with King Renly, and his best friend went back to the Iron Islands to barter for his father's fleet. His men from beyond the wall prepared to march south from the Twins, and what the 2 Baratheon kings and Tywin Lannister were doing, Robb knew nothing of. Did Robb act like a boy, marching out so quickly because he was bored of sitting in Riverrun? All Robb knew was that he could not turn back and return to Riverrun. It would make the king in the north look a fool, and his men's morale and faith would most likely dissipate. Nightfall is approaching. We should make camp and press on for the Golden Tooth on the morrow, Jon suggested. Jon and Robb galloped off the hill and rode back up to the front of the train, rejoining Sir Stevron. A few hours later, the army pulled off the river road and set up camp at the foot of the mountain range that sat north of the Golden Tooth. It would seem if Robb wanted to turn back, that was the point to do so, but he couldn't. He knew he couldn't. If ever there was a time to turn back, it was before Robb even left Riverrun. The horns blew and the army put up tents and lit their fires, making camp at the mouth of the pass. Sentries were posted around the camp and near the road to kill any Leford scouts or riders that came by. As night fell, Robb summoned his bannermen to his tent to discuss their plans. Robb laid out all the options they had formulated to challenge the Golden Tooth and heard his bannermen's responses. The Great Jon, Tormund and Mage Mormont wanted to take the Golden Tooth by siege. Sir Stephen Frey, the Bronze Yone and Galbert Glover wanted to ride hard through the pass and slip by the Golden Tooth as fast as possible. Rakard Karstark, the Blackfish and the Old Beargear opted instead to press on to the edge of the pass and fortify it, let Stafford raise his host and face them when they passed through the Golden Tooth. The debate grew louder and angrier until Robb's bannermen were yelling at one another in the tent. The yelling grew so loud and insufferable that Robb broke his silence and roared, "Enough!" With that, his bannermen fell silent. Robb stood for a moment, silent and still, as lost and directionless as he had been before. "Out, all of you," he commanded. With that his bannermen left the tent, bowing to their king and exiting the tent. Robb now saw that he needed to be alone, not even in the company of Jon or the Blackfish. None of them could give him the answer, because Robb should never have marched on the Golden Tooth in the first place. If he tried to slip past it, he'd take losses. If he tried to besiege it, Stafford and Tywin would ride hard and crush him from both sides. If he tucked tail and ran back to Riverrun, he'd look weak and indecisive to both his allies and his enemies. Robb had led his men into this mess, and as their commander, their king, it was his duty to lead them out. Robb put his hands on the table in the middle of the tent and looked down at the map once more. The king in the north traced his fingers along the river road from his encampment, marked by a stone-carved wolf-headed figure, to the Golden Tooth. The map made things look so small and simple, everything was so close together that Robb's map marker seemed to be right next to the Golden Tooth, yet it was many leagues away in reality. Rob looked at the drawings of the mountains north and south of the pass where the river road led to the Golden Tooth, a very simplistic design, inaccurate to how Rob had seen the mountains on the horizon when at the head of his army. But mapmakers only concerned themselves with the general shapes of the landscapes, they did not bother trying to capture the likeness of the mountains. If they did, it would take months to explore every crack, crevasse and narrow path across the mountains. With that thought, Rob felt as though a bright light had hit him and illuminated his surroundings. The Golden Tooth was regarded as the only way into the Westerlands through the mountains because it was the only pass on the maps, but what if that was not true? Mountains were not altogether impassable, there were pathways through them if one simply knew where to look. Invisible paths, not ones laid out by a dirt track but rather by a link of level and stable ground from one side of the mountain to the other. Surely across the vast mountainous range, there was some probable path through the mountains, it was simply a matter of finding it. It was a gamble, Rob had no doubt there were probably a great many trails through the mountain ranges, but many would lead to dead ends or back out the wrong side of the mountain range or in view of a Lannister watchtower. Even if Rob could find a path through to the wastelands, there was still the question of whether or not it would be wide enough for Rob's men and their horses. Unicorns were natural mountain climbers but horses were not. As much of a gamble as it may have been, Rob knew that the Golden Tooth was a certainty of loss. Rob exited his tent and found most of his bannermen seated around campfires nearby, perhaps wishing to remain close in case Rob wished to summon them back. When his banners caught him coming out, they flocked around Rob, waiting to hear from their king. As anxiety began to tumble and swirl within Rob's stomach, he took a deep breath in, banished his fears and held his head up high. "I suggest all of you get some rest. Tomorrow, we will begin scouting these mountains for any paths that might lead us around the Golden Tooth," Rob declared, pointing to the mountains that towered over their camp. Murmurs and whispers began to surge amongst his vassals, seeming unsure if Rob had lost his wit. "Your Grace, do you mean to tell us there is a secret path through the mountains into the Westerlands?" asked Sir Stevron. "That is what we shall discover. I want our skin changers, our unicorns and our best scouts in small groups to find any way through these mountains. If they lead to a dead end, if they lead us in the path of a Lannister watchtower, or if they fork off into a different path, we will mark them and report back to the camp. I will lead one party with Grey Wind. Jon, I want you to lead another party with Ghost." Jon nodded in agreement. "You mean to have us scout these mountains on the off chance that we will find a way through to the Westerlands, Your Grace?" asked the Bronze Yone. "That is exactly what we shall do," Rob declared. "And if we find nothing, then we press on to the Golden Tooth, where we shall undoubtedly suffer heavy losses. If that is our fate, then so be it, but I will rest easier knowing that I exhausted every possible alternative beforehand." With that, Rob dismissed his lords, warriors and knights and returned to his tent to sleep. The night was longer than Rob had wished it to be. He lay awake for a while, consumed by his anxieties, before he finally found sleep. The next morning, Rob was awoken early by his guards. After he dressed and left his tent, he summoned his commanders to him, still yawning and wiping the sleep from their eyes. Rob explained his wish to have his men break into groups varying between 3 and 6 and to send them into the mountains and search for any pathways into the Westerlands. If a path was too narrow for them to move their horses through or lead them in sight of a Lannister watchtower, then they would waste no time on it and return to camp. The Blackfish took command of a group of 5 scouts of his own to search for a path. Many of the Vale Knights who volunteered led their own scouting parties, having grown up in mountainous terrains. The Skin Changers let their beasts lead their parties to sniff out any paths, and the Skagasi rode their unicorns into the mountains, being able to scout paths faster. Rob sent Jon out with Ghost along with members of Rob's battle guard, Torhen Karstark, Dormund Giantspan, Owen Nuri, Sir Eustace Hunter and Sir Donal Locke. Rob himself led his own detachment of his battle guard with Grey Wind, being joined by Small Jon Umber, Dacy Mormont, Harold Hardying, Torred Giantspan and Rob's squire Oliver Free. The remainder of Rob's battle guard at the camp, Eddard Karstark and Sir John Redfort, formed their own party with some men at arms to scout out a path. The rest of Rob's battle guard was far from him: Theon at the Iron Islands, Patrek Mallister at Seaguard and Lucas Blackwood, Sir Waymar Royce, Sir Wendell Marndale, Robin Flint and Sir Pewin Free were guarding Rob's mother on her mission to treat with King Renly. And of course, Darin Hornwood and 3 of the Freys that fought with Rob's battle guard were slain either at the Whispering Wood or at the camps. The scouts set out from the camp and small groups made their way to the mountains in search of a way to the Westerlands. As Rob's party came close to the foot of the mountain, Grey Wind began to sniff the ground and seemed to pick up some kind of a trail. Grey Wind led the party up the mountains on a relatively smooth path, not too steep for horses. The path wound and twisted, but never too sharply. Rob's party followed Grey Wind down the path deeper and deeper into the mountain, leading them down a defile and up along beneath a ridge, a crooked and stony way, yet always remaining wide enough for Rob's men and their horses to travel along, though they would most likely be safer traveling single file. "How did you find this, boy?" asked Rob, looking to Grey Wind as he led them further on, though Rob did not expect the wolf to answer. "Probably a goat track, your grace," said Harold Hardying as he followed behind Rob. "There are plenty of these back in the vale. I expect your wolf is tracking the smell of his dinner." Harold Hardying had become close to Rob and his companions during their time at Riverrun, being close in age to them as he was 17 years old. Rob asked leave from the Bronze Yone to make Harold a member of his battle guard, and Lord Royce agreed. When they set out, Harold claimed that he'd scaled mountains twice as high and sheer in the vale growing up, though he most likely meant it as a light-hearted boast. "Finding goats may be all well and good for Grey Wind, but can we be sure this will lead us into the Westerlands?" asked Darcy Mormont. "I didn't see any goats or farms nearby when we made camp, meaning they probably live on the other side of the mountains," Harold suggested. "Only one way to find out," Rob declared, and their party pressed on. Eventually, after a few hours, they came to the other side of the mountain, and beyond they could see the path before them wind down the mountain slope to the wide grasslands below. Some goats roamed the grasslands. Rob looked to his left as he scanned the lands ahead of him, and in the distance, he could faintly see the river road continuing on out of the mountains. Rob was now sure that they were in the Westerlands and had found a way through. As his companions cheered and laughed, Rob closed his eyes and sighed deeply, thanking all the old gods of the forest for saving him in his harshest time. Rob had never been more sure in his life that Afluda, Magna of the gods, watched over him. "Enough of that," Rob commanded, bringing silence to his battle guard. "Let's get back. Tomorrow we march the army through here," Rob declared. By the time they got back to the camp, it was nightfall. As Rob and his party returned through the trees at the foot of the mountain range, 2 sentries greeted them with spears, shields and the yell of "Halt!" "Easy men, it is us," Rob declared as he approached from the dark with raised hands, entering the torchlight and revealing himself to his guards. "Your Grace." "Forgive me," the sentry pleaded. "Not at all, you were doing your duty," Rob reassured him, patting him on the shoulder as he passed by. Within the camp, Rob led his group through the crowds of soldiers who bowed as the king walked past until he found the Blackfish seated around a fire drinking wine or ale with his other bannermen. Those who had joined the scouting parties looked exhausted and defeated as they drank, John among them, sitting on the grass with his legs stretched out, sipping wine while Ghost lay next to him. Rob could tell none of their scouting ventures through the mountains had bore any fruit. As Rob came into sight, many of them struggled to their feet to bow, grunting and cursing as they did. It seemed the paths through the mountains for Rob's men had been arduous and sore on their limbs. "Easy men, take your rest," said Rob, urging his bannermen to relax. "We have found nothing, your Grace," Sir Eustace Hunter declared, his voice wrought with despair. "All parties returned from the mountain finding nothing but chasms, dead ends, or put us right in the sight of Lannister watchtowers," the Blackfish added. "Were you seen?" asked Rob, concerned by the mention of watchtowers. The Blackfish shook his head. "We were not. My scouts and I were quiet and cautious, but trying to march an army past it will require the tower be garrisoned by men both blind and deaf. We found 3 paths through the mountains, one sniffed out by Ghost, the other 2 scouted by Skin Changers. They are stable and out of sight, but each path has a climb somewhere along it, a few ledges of boulders, easy enough for us to pull ourselves over and for our wolves and unicorns to bound up, but we'll have to abandon the horses," John explained. Rob smiled, both coy in his victory at being the one to find the path through the mountains and eager to bring good news to his disheartened friends. "Well, I have no intention of abandoning our horses, nor do I intend to run headfirst into the Golden Tooth, therefore we will take another path," Rob explained. Rob could hear Torek, Smalljan and Harold sniggering behind him, just as smug as Rob was with their path through the mountains. Rob's bannermen looked to their king, most with vacant expressions, some exchanging vexed looks. "Another way." Lord Ricard Karstark huffed, bemused and tired. The one we have just returned from scouting. Grey Wind sniffed out a goat track that leads through the mountains. No ledges or boulders to scale, only a few dips and rises as it goes. It's narrow so the horses and unicorns will have to march single file and the path keeps us below the cliffs and out of sight of any watchtowers. Rob's bannermen were baffled with wonder, disbelieving in their luck. "And you're sure the path led all the way to the Westerlands?" asked Galbart Glover. "We saw it with our own eyes," Harold declared. "Can you be sure you didn't get lead in a circle and come out the other end in the Riverlands?" asked Sir Stephen. "We didn't. The path veered from left to right now and again, but was relatively straight all the way through," said Oliver. Relief and joy overcame Rob's bannermen. They lightly celebrated, ate and then went to sleep, readying themselves for the trek across the mountains the next day. On the morrow, Rob gave the order to pack up the camp and ready to march. The men were given orders to ready themselves to travel single file through the mountains. Rob led them to the goat track with Grey Wind padding ahead of him. Grey Wind led them through the mountains with Rob's entire army funneling down the path behind him, one rider after the other. Grey Wind retraced his path through the mountains, leading them down the defile and up along beneath the ridge as Rob and his party had done on foot the day before. The mountains felt more alive this time around, probably due to the clopping of horse and unicorn hoofs against the path echoing through the pass. The horses and unicorns moved at a slow walk through the mountains, less than a trot, for fear any faster and the horses might lose their footing and slip when the path led them alongside a chasm. Eventually, they made their way out the other end of the path and the horses fanned out across the open grasslands beyond the trees at the foot of the mountain. It took hours before all the horses, unicorns and walk companions made it through, and then the camp was re-established on the adjacent face of the mountains from where it had been that morning. Rob sat upon his horse and looked out across the Westerlands. It had seemed so far away the day before when the mountains stood between them and Rob. Rob was so certain, so fearful, that he would have to face the Golden Tooth in a siege, and yet he'd quite literally found another way around it. Sometimes Rob felt like he was stumbling his way through the war. His decision at Moat Cailin to split his force at the Twins, his decision to send the Blackfish to lure the Kingslayer to the Whispering Wood, his decision to take two of the camps at Riverrun at the same time. Each was a gamble with no small amount of luck tethered to them. Had even the smallest factor changed, Rob might have lost the war a long time ago. Perhaps it was luck or the favor of the gods that was keeping Rob alive. One wrong command in the war meetings, one wrong strike or block in battle and he'd have been dead. But at the same time, Rob could feel himself growing with each passing experience. The boy who commanded troops at Moat Cailin would have thrown his entire host at the Golden Tooth or even marched on Harrenhal. At the Battle of the Camps, Rob's actions in battle were more fluid, more confident, than they had been at the Whispering Wood. Each time luck had favored him, each gamble that had paid off, seemed to help shape Rob and make him more than what he was. Were all the great leaders and warriors Rob had read about in the history books truly great? Or were they lucky enough to keep their heads until they could learn from the trials of their lives? As Rob gazed down at the river road not far from the camp, he wondered what trials awaited him at Oxcross and what they would make of him. Rob had crossed into the Westerlands undetected, but now he was in enemy territory for the first time. There was not a friendly castle, town or hut in any direction other than back through the mountain path. This was a new test for Rob, and he prayed that luck would not abandon him now. Chapter 18, The King in the South. Chapter text. King Renly had amassed a truly mighty host of men together for his army. They were camped near Bitterbridge along the Rosa Road, but Renly could not see any bridge, nor the Rosa Road, nor the Mandaya from where he was. All Renly could see was the encampment of his great host. Thousands of cook fires filled the air with a pale smoky haze. The horse lines alone stretched out over leagues. It looked as though a forest had been felled to make the tall staffs that held the banners. Great siege engines lined the grassy verge of the Rosa Road, mangonels and tray buckets and rolling rams mounted on wheels taller than a man on horseback. The steel points of pikes flamed red with sunlight, as if already blooded, while the pavilions of the knights and high lords sprouted from the grass like silken mushrooms. There were men with spears and men with swords, men in steel caps and mail shirts, camp followers strutting their charms, archers fletching arrows, teamsters driving wagons, swineherds driving pigs, pages running messages, squires honing swords, knights riding palfreys, grooms leading ill-tempered destriers. The golden rose of Highgarden was seen everywhere, sewn on the right breast of armsmen and servants, flapping and fluttering from the green silk banners that adorned lance and pike, painted upon the shields hung outside the pavilions of the sons and brothers and cousins and uncles of House Tyrell. Other banners fluttered in the wind as well, the fox and flowers of House Florent, Fossoe apples red and green, Lord Tarlis striding huntsman, oak leaves for Oakert, cranes for Crane, a cloud of black and orange butterflies for the Muladors. Across the Mondea, beyond Renly's sight, the Stormlords had raised their standards, Renly's own bannermen, sworn to House Baratheon and Storm's End. Renly walked through the camp now and again, meeting with his men both lord, knight and foot soldier to raise morale. When Renly passed through the Stormlands part of the camp he spotted Bryce Caron's nightingales, the Penrose quills, and Lord Estermont's sea turtle, green on green. But while there were plenty of banners of the Tyrells, the Reach and the Stormlands, the most constant banner throughout the camp was Renly's own standard that flew high over all. From the top of his tallest siege tower, a wheeled oaken immensity covered with raw hides, streamed the great war banner Renly had personally commissioned, a cloth big enough to carpet many a hall, shimmering gold, with the crowned stag of Baratheon black upon it, prancing proud and tall. Renly could see the banner atop the siege tower from his seat at the melee ground. A field had been cleared off, fences and galleries and tilting barriers thrown up. Thousands were gathered to watch. The grounds were torn and muddy and littered with bits of dinted armor and broken lances, from the full day of fighting, but now the end was near. Fewer than a score of knights remained ahorse, charging and slashing at each other as watchers and fallen combatants cheered them on. Renly watched on in amusement as he saw two destriers collide in full armor, going down in a tangle of steel and horse flesh. Renly sat upon the high seat of the gallery, watching his knights battle. Since having himself crowned, Renly had taken the liberty of crafting his kingly attire to reflect his proper station. Around his brow sat a slender circlet. It was soft gold, a ring of roses exquisitely wrought, at the front lifted a stag's head of dark green jade, adorned with golden eyes and golden antlers. The crowned stag decorated the king's green velvet tunic as well, worked in gold thread upon his chest, the Baratheon sigil in the colours of Highgarden. By Renly's side, sharing his high seat was his young queen, Margaery, daughter to Lord Mace Tyrell. A pretty girl, Renly supposed, with a doe's soft eyes and a mane of curling brown hair that fell about her shoulders in lazy ringlets. Her smile was shy and sweet, though she was not exactly what Renly wanted. He liked the girl well enough, in truth Renly had to like her, their marriage was the mortar that held the great Southron alliance together, without it, Renly would not have half his army. Gathered along the rest of the gallery were more of Renly's loyal bannermen, Lord Mathis Rowan, stouter and more florid than ever, the golden tree of his house spread across his white doublet. Below him sat Lady Oakert, tiny and delicate, and to her left Lord Randil Tarly of Horn Hill, his great sword Heartspan propped up against the back of his seat. The melee had been Renly's idea. With all the talk of the young Wolf Robb and Tywin Lannister and their many skirmishes and battles in the Riverlands, Renly felt it was important to rouse his men with some excitement. 116 competitors battling amongst one another, flaunting the skill of the knights under Renly's command before the many foot soldiers who built up his ranks. The melee would give the knights a chance to flaunt their skills and earn prestige and loyalty from the common-born footmen who would join them on the field. Renly clapped his black-gloved hands together as his dear knight Loras wheeled to deliver a backhand blow with a long-handled axe that shattered the shield of the man pursuing him and sent him reeling in his stirrups. Loras was Renly's good brother now that he had wed Loras's sister, Margaery. More than that, Loras was Renly's dearest protector, the Lord Commander of the Rainbow Guard, with his rainbow-striped cloak fluttering from his back as he battled in the melee. The Rainbow Guard was Renly's own order of protectors, equivalent to the Kingsguard Knights. But rather than bland white cloaks and pale armor, its members wore rainbow-striped silk cloaks, although they used their own sigils on their shields and garb. The rainbow was among the symbols of the faith of the Seven, and each member of the Rainbow Guard wore armor of a single different color, with the group of seven together representing the seven-colored rainbow. A roar went up from the crowd as a helmetless red-bearded man with a griffin on his shield went down before a big knight in blue armor. But the Blue Knight was not a knight at all, nor was it a man but instead a woman, and called the Blue Beauty by the crowds. The armored warrior woman wore steel that was a deep cobalt, even the blunt morning star she wielded with such deadly effect, her mount barred in the quartered sun and moon heraldry of House Tarth. Red Ronnet's down, gods be damned, a man cursed. Lauras'll do for that blue, a companion answered before a roar drowned out the rest of his words, but Renly could only imagine it was a curse word denoting to women. Another man was fallen, trapped beneath his injured horse, both of them screaming in pain. Squires rushed out to aid them. Out in the field, another man lost his seat to Sir Loras in his armor and rainbow-striped cloak, and the king shouted approval with the rest. "Loras!" Margaery called. "Loras! Highgarden!" The queen clapped her hands together in excitement. Only 4 men were left in the fight now, or rather 3 men and 1 woman, and there was small doubt whom king and commons favored. Renly had no doubt in his mind that it would be Renly's gallant Loras who would lead Renly's armies to victory and strike fear into his enemies. Tywin had his mountain and had lost his Kingslayer, Joffrey had his brute, the hound, the Stark boy had his blackfish, and according to stories he now had a white wolf too, whomever that may be, but Renly had his Knight of Flowers who would vanquish them all on the field of battle. It was also Renly's hope to see Sir Barristan the Bold wear a rainbow cloak. Renly had 6 knights including Sir Loras as his Lord Commander, but no 7th knight. In Renly's years as Master of Laws, Sir Barristan remained a man of honor and nobility, the only one of Robert's protectors worthy to be a Kingsguard, and if the inbred twit Joffrey would not have him, Renly would have seen Sir Barristan elevated to his rightful place in his own sworn brotherhood. But alas, Sir Barristan the Bold had disappeared and no one had heard a word of him since he was dismissed from the Kingsguard. Sir Loras rode a tall white stallion in silver mail and fought with a long-handled axe. A crest of golden roses ran down the center of his helm. 2 of the other survivors had made common cause. They spurred their mounts toward the women in the cobalt armor. As they closed to either side, the Blue Beauty rained hard, smashing one man full in the face with her splintered shield while her black destrier lashed out with a steel-shod hoof at the other. In a blink, one combatant was unhorsed, the other reeling. The Blue Beauty let her broken shield drop to the ground to free her left arm, and then the Knight of Flowers was on her. The weight of his steel seemed to hardly diminish the grace and quickness with which Sir Loras moved, his rainbow cloak swirling about him. The white horse and the black one wheeled like lovers at a harvest dance, the riders throwing steel in place of kisses. Long axe flashed and Morningstar whirled. Both weapons were blunted, yet still, they raised an awful clangor. Shieldless, the Blue Beauty was getting much the worse of it. Sir Loras rained down blows on her head and shoulders, to shouts of Highgarden, from the throng. The other gave an answer with her Morningstar, but whenever the ball came crashing in, Sir Loras interposed his battered green shield, emblazoned with 3 golden roses. When the long axe caught the Blue Beauty's hand on the backswing and sent the Morningstar flying from her grasp, the crowd screamed like a rutting beast. The Knight of Flowers raised his axe for the final blow. The Blue Beauty charged into it. The stallions slammed together, the blunted axe head smashed against the scarred blue breastplate, but somehow the Blue Beauty had the haft locked between steel gauntlet fingers. She wrenched it from Sir Loras's hand, and suddenly the 2 were grappling mount to mount, and an instant later they were falling. As their horses pulled apart, they crashed to the ground with bone-jarring force. Loras Tyrell, on the bottom, took the brunt of the impact. The Blue Beauty pulled a long dirk free and flicked open Tyrell's visor. The roar of the crowd was too loud for Renly to hear what Sir Loras said, but he saw the word form on his split, bloody lips. Yield. The Blue Beauty climbed unsteadily to her feet and raised his dirk in the direction of Renly Baratheon, the salute of a champion to his king. Squires dashed onto the field to help the vanquished knight to his feet. When they got his helm off, Renly breathed a sigh of relief to see his beautiful face bruised but not damaged. Loras was a young and handsome knight, and Renly would keep him that way for as long as possible if he could help it. Renly looked at the woman dressed as a blue knight, intrigued by all she had done. Of all the knights who competed in the melee, she had emerged victorious. Renly had let her enter to prove herself and would have been satisfied with her skill if she had outlasted 16 knights. When Renly saw she had outlasted 50 knights he was intrigued, when he saw she had outlasted 100 he was astounded, when he saw she was one of the last 4 he could hardly believe it, and when she defeated Renly's Knight of Flowers, Renly was baffled. Normally, if a knight were to draw blood from Renly's dear Loras, he would be as bitter as his foul brother Stannis, but this was a rare exception, for this woman in cobalt armor had beaten the odds to prove herself to Renly, and he was both flattered and honored. Pleased with his champion, Renly smiled and beckoned the knight forward. "Approach, King," Renly called to the champion. She limped toward the gallery. At close hand, the brilliant blue armor looked rather less splendid. Everywhere it showed scars, the dents of mace and warhammer, the long gouges left by swords, chips in the enameled breastplate and helm. Her cloak hung in rags. From the way she moved, within her suit of plate, she was no less battered. A few voices hailed her with cries of Tarth, and, "A beauty! A beauty!" some shouted. The blue beauty knelt before the king. "Grace," she said, her voice muffled by her dented greedilm. "You are all your lord father claimed you were." Renly's voice carried over the field. "I've seen Sir Loras unhorsed once or twice, but never quite in that fashion." Renly looked at Loras as he wiped the blood from the corner of his lip. "That were no proper unhorsing," complained a drunken archer nearby, a Tyrell rose sewn on his jerkin. "A vile trick, pulling the lad down." Renly cared not for the jealousies and bigotries of feeble-minded men who cared only for the old unquestioned traditions of things. Renly was going to war and required warriors of skill and gallantry, both of which the woman possessed. Renly raised his arms out and called out for all the crowd to hear and declared the Blue Beauty the victor of the great melee at Bitterbridge, last mounted of 116 knights, but rather than her moniker, Renly used her right name, Brian of Tarth, daughter to Lord Selwyn the Evenstar. "As champion, you may ask of me any boon that you desire. If it lies in my power, it is yours." "Your Grace," Brian answered, "I ask the honor of a place among your Rainbow Guard. I would be one of your 7, and pledge my life to yours, to go where you go, ride at your side, and keep you safe from all hurt and harm." A gentle smile curled on Renly's face. This warrior woman that others mocked so undeservingly had faced against 115 skilled knights and bested them all, and for reward, she did not ask for gold, lands, title, nothing but the chance to use those skills she had demonstrated to serve Renly. "Done," he said without so much as a second thought. "Rise, and remove your helm." She did as he bid her. And when the greedilm was lifted, showing all those gathered why her moniker of beauty was such an insult. Beauty, they called her, mocking. The hair beneath the visor was a squirrel's nest of dirty straw, and her face, Brian's eyes were large and very blue, a young girl's eyes, trusting and guileless, but the rest, her features were broad and coarse, her teeth prominent and crooked, her mouth too wide, her lips so plump they seemed swollen. 1,000 freckles speckled her cheeks and brow, and her nose had been broken more than once. Renly was not a man who prioritized a woman's beauties, but rather her character, and Brian of Tarth had more character than most. Renly descended from the gallery and came to Brian on the melee field. Renly cut away her torn cloak and fastened a rainbow in its place, and immediately Brian's smile lit up her face, and her voice was strong and proud as she said, "My life for yours, your grace. From this day on, I am your shield, I swear it by the old gods and the new." Brian may not have been a beauty in the face, but she was a beauty when it came to the grace of a warrior, and she was also mighty in size, standing tall and looking down upon Renly, who himself was a rather tall man. Renly would say that Brian was near as tall as the hound, Clegane. "Your Grace," a voice called out, drawing away Renly's attention. Renly turned his head and saw one of his knights who had not entered the tourney swing down off his horse and approach, Sir Colan of Green Pools if Renly was not mistaken. "I beg your leave." He went to one knee. "I have the honor to bring you the Lady Caitlin Stark, sent as envoy by her son Robb, Lord of Winterfell." Sir Colan pointed to an auburn-haired woman seated atop a horse in a long dark blue hooded cloak and surrounded by knights and guards not of Renly's own army. "Lord of Winterfell and King in the North," Sir Caitlin corrected him. She dismounted and moved to Sir Colan's side. Surprise overcame Renly, for seeing Lady Caitlin in his camp was the last thing he had expected. "Lady Caitlin. We are most pleased." He turned to his young queen. "Margaery, my sweet, this is the Lady Caitlin Stark of Winterfell." "You are most welcome here, Lady Stark," the girl said, all soft courtesy. "I am sorry for your loss." "You are kind," said Caitlin. "My lady, I swear to you, I will see that the Lannisters answer for your husband's murder," the king declared. "When I take King's Landing, I'll send you Cersea's head. It will be enough to know that justice has been done, my lord." "Your Grace," Brian the Blue corrected sharply, already stepping up to her duties as Renly's protector. "And you should kneel when you approach the king." "The distance between a lord and a grace is a small one," my Lady Caitlin said. "Lord Renly wears a crown, as does my son. If you wish, we may stand here in the mud and debate what honors and titles are rightly due to each, but it strikes me that we have more pressing matters to consider. Some of Renly's lords bristled at that, but the king only laughed. A woman of sense and priorities, Renly thought. Well said, my lady. There will be time enough for graces when these wars are done. Tell me, when does your son mean to march against Harrenhal? Lady Catelyn arched an eyebrow as though she'd caught Renly trying to sneak something past her. I do not sit on my son's war councils, my lord. Renly noticed Brian wince, still unpleased at hearing Renly being called a lord, but he shot her a confident look that said, it's fine. So long as he leaves a few Lannisters for me, I'll not complain. What has he done with the Kingslayer? Jaime Lannister is held prisoner at Riverrun. Still alive. Lord Mathis Rowan seemed dismayed. This was not what Renly wished to hear. When stories stirred of the Kingslayer being defeated in battle, some said his hand was eaten by Robb's direwolf, some said he was slain either by the Blackfish or by the newly spoken of warrior, the White Wolf, and others that he had escaped. Knowing that the Kingslayer was alive and well did not bode well for Renly, for should he be released, he would be a great threat on the battlefield for all of Joffrey and Tywin's enemies. Bemused, Renly said, it would seem the direwolf is gentler than the lion. Gentler than the Lannisters, murmured Lady Oakert with a bitter smile, is drier than the sea. I call it weak. Lord Randall Tarly had a short, bristly grey beard and a reputation for blunt speech. No disrespect to you, Lady Stark, but it would have been more seemly had Lord Robb come to pay homage to the king himself, rather than hiding behind his mother's skirts. King Robb is warring, my lord, Catelyn replied with icy courtesy, not playing at Tony. Renly grinned. Go softly, Lord Randall, I fear you're overmatched. He summoned a steward in the livery of Storm's End. Find a place for the ladies' companions, and see that they have every comfort. Lady Catelyn shall have my own pavilion. Since Lord Caswell has been so kind as to give me use of his castle, I have no need of it. My lady, when you are rested, I would be honored if you would share our meat and mead at the feast Lord Caswell is giving us tonight. A farewell feast. I fear his lordship is eager to see the heels of my hungry horde. Not true, your grace, protested the wispy young Lord Caswell. What is mine is yours. Whenever someone said that to my brother Robert, he took them at their word, Renly said. Do you have daughters? Yes, your grace. 2. Then thank the gods that I am not Robert. My sweet queen is all the woman I desire. Renly held out his hand to lead his queen from the melee field. We'll talk again when you've had a chance to refresh yourself, Lady Catelyn. Renly led his bride back toward the castle while his steward conducted Catelyn to the king's green silk pavilion. When inside the castle, Renly gathered his now complete Rainbow Guard in Lord Caswell's solo while Renly had Margaery go to her chambers to ready for the night's feast. Loras and Brian came as they were and dressed in tattered, scarred and beaten armor with their rainbow cloaks fastened around them. The rest of Renly's Rainbow Guards were fresh and their armor clean and shiny. There was Sir Robar the Red of House Royce, comely in a rough-hewn way and his eyes pale. Robar wore a fine suit of scarlet plates filigreed with runes of the first men in bronze. Sir Aemon the Yellow of House Huey wore plate armor enameled in yellow and covered in sunflowers, and both sword and axe hung from his waist belt. Sir Gyard the Green of House Morrigan wore a suit of jade green armor embossed in black steel with wing decorations. Sir Parman the Purple of House Crane wore a suit of purple armor and surcoat decorated with purple plums. Lastly, Lord Bryce the Orange of House Caron, Lord of Nizong, clad in orangish bronze armor. Lord Bryce was the only lord amongst Renly's Rainbow Guard. Unlike the archaic white cloaks of the Kingsguard, Renly did not require his protectors to forsake all lands, titles and family ties, he only requested oaths of loyalty from honorable knights. All the 7 gathered before Renly wore rainbow cloaks, and with Brian the Blue, the Rainbow Guard was complete. With Renly's hand, Lord Mace Tyrell, remaining at Highgarden, the Rainbow Guard was the closest to an inner circle of trusted advisors the king could muster. Renly was caught off guard by the arrival of Lady Stark and required advice about how to proceed. Lord Robb possesses dominion over the north, the Riverlands and the Vale. If he wishes to form an alliance, we could unite 5 of the great houses against Tywin, Joffrey and Stannis, Sir Aemon the Yellow suggested. An alliance is not the same as swearing obeisance. Doubtless, this young wolf will still wish to style himself king in the north across his 3 regions once the war is won. He is yet another usurper who covets what rightfully belongs to Renly, Lord Bryce the Orange declared. Each of Renly's knights made their thoughts known, save for Sir Robar the Red, who remained silent and his expression sullen. "What troubles you, Sir Robar?" asked Renly, tilting his head. Robar looked to his king and then to his fellow knights. "Forgive me, your grace. It is only my little brother, Waymar. He is among Lady Caitlyn's retinue," Sir Robar explained. Some of Renly's knights seemed surprised about such a revelation, but it was not altogether unreasonable an occurrence. Sir Robar's family, the Royces of Runestone, were of the Vale, which had sworn to Robb Stark. It was also said that Robar's father, the Bronze Yone, had led the host of Vale knights to join the war effort. "Did you speak with him?" asked Renly, curious about what insights Robar could give on Lady Caitlyn's northern retinue. Sir Robar nodded his head. "Briefly. He claims that several of Lady Caitlyn's highborn escorts, including him, were handpicked from Robb Stark's battleguard," Robar explained. Renly smiled and shrugged. "A Royce in my Rainbow Guard and a Royce in Robb Stark's battle guard. It seems the king in the north and I have similar tastes in protectors," Renly japed, causing gentle laughter of amusement to rise up amongst his knights. "When I tried to inquire on Robb Stark's current whereabouts or his intentions, Waymar became guarded and obstinate with me," Robar admitted. "It could mean he has something to hide," Brian the Blue cautioned. "Or it could mean that they don't trust us," Loras suggested with a shrug. Brian pondered for a moment and then nodded in approval of Loras's alternative. Renly thought long and hard before declaring his intentions. "I suppose at the very least I should hear out what Lady Caitlyn has to offer with an open mind. But you are right that the Starks must swear fealty to us, Lord Bryce. There will be no compromise on that front. The Seven Kingdoms cannot be allowed to fracture into two halves," Renly declared in a serious tone, and all Renly's Rainbow Guard agreed. Later, the feast began and Renly and Margaery were seated at the center of the high table. Lady Caitlyn arrived escorted by her highborn guards taken from her son's battle guard, Sir Wendell Marndaly, Lucas Blackwood, Sir Winfrey, Robin Flint and Sir Waymar Royce. Lady Caitlyn had washed and changed into a gown befitting a feast in the presence of a king. The great hall of Lord Caswell's keep was great only by courtesy, yet the room was found on the crowded benches for Caitlyn's men, amidst Renly's own knights. Caitlyn was assigned a place on the dais between red-faced Lord Mathis Rowan and genial Sir John Fossoe of the Green Apple Fossoes. Renly's Rainbow Guard sat with him at the high table, with Brian of Tarth joining them. She did not gown herself as a lady but chose a knight's finery instead, a velvet doublet quartered rose and azure, breeches and boots and a fine-tooled sword belt, her new rainbow cloak flowing down her back. The rest of Renly's Rainbow Guard dressed similarly in the tunics, jerkins and doublets of knights adorned with their house sigils and their rainbow cloaks clasped around their necks. Of food there was plenty. The war had not touched the fabled bounty of Highgarden. While singers sang and tumblers tumbled, they began with pears poached in wine, and went on to tiny savory fish rolled in salt and cooked crisp, and capons stuffed with onions and mushrooms. There were great loaves of brown bread, mounds of turnips and sweet corn and peas, immense hams and roast geese and trenchers dripping full of venison stewed with beer and barley. For the sweet, Lord Caswell's servants brought down trays of pastries from his castle kitchens, cream swans and spun sugar unicorns, lemon cakes in the shape of roses, spiced honey biscuits and blackberry tarts, apple crisps and wheels of buttery cheese. Renly sat with his young bride on his left hand and Loras to his right. Apart from the white linen bandage around his brow, Sir Loras seemed none the worse for the day's misadventures and seemed to harbor no ill will towards his new sworn sister, Brian even toasting her welcome to the Rainbow Guard at one point, while Sir Robar, who sat next to her, patted her on the back. From time to time, King Renly would feed Margaery some choice morsel off the point of his dagger, or lean over to plant the lightest of kisses on her cheek, but it was Sir Loras who shared most of his jests and confidences. The king enjoyed his food and drink, that was plain to see, yet he seemed neither glutton nor drunkard. He laughed often, and well, and spoke amiably to highborn lords and lowly serving wenches alike. Some of his guests were less moderate. They drank too much and boasted too loudly, to her mind. Lord Willem's sons Joshua and Ilyas disputed heatedly about who would be first over the walls of King's Landing. Lord Varner dandled a serving girl on his lap, nuzzling at her neck while one hand went exploring down her bodice. Guyard the Green, who fancied himself a singer, diddled a harp and gave them a verse about tying lions' tails in knots, parts of which rhymed. Sir Mark Mullador brought a black and white monkey and fed him morsels from his own plate, while Sir Tanton of the Red Apple Fossoes climbed on the table and swore to slay Sander Clegane in single combat. The vow might have been taken more solemnly if Sir Tanton had not had one foot in a gravy boat when he made it. The height of folly was reached when a plump fool came capering out in gold-painted tin with a cloth lion's head, and chased a dwarf around the tables, whacking him over the head with a bladder. Finally King Renly demanded to know why he was beating his brother. "Why, your grace, I'm the Kinslayer," the fool said. "It's Kingslayer, fool of a fool," Renly said, and the hall rang with laughter. Renly's eyes fell upon Lady Stark, who conversed with Lord Rowan next to her, neither of them in as joyous a mood as the rest of the attendants. The fool of a Kingslayer was the only Kingslayer Renly could get his hands on. Alas, Sir Jaime had already been claimed as a prize by the young wolf. Much had come to pass in the time since Robert's death. First Tywine and Sir Jaime ride out and set the Riverlands ablaze, then Robb Stark marched south and won a pair of victories against the Kingslayer's men, and all the while Renly had been plotting but achieved nothing. Renly wore a crown and staked his claim, but what did he have? He had no victories, no losses, nothing thus far but his army. Aegon had his conquest, Robert had his rebellion, but it seemed that Renly's war for the crown had left him behind, and all Renly could hear was Robb Stark this and Joffrey that. Renly looked to his Rainbow Guard, skilled tourney knights but all of them untested in true battle. The king watched as Lord Bryce tried to goad Sir Robar into juggling a brace of daggers, but Robar was instead fixated sullenly on his brother, who sat with Lady Stark's men. "Lady Catelyn, you are wrong," Brian declared sternly, drawing Renly's attention. "Winter will never come for the likes of us. Should we die in battle, they will surely sing of us, and it's always summer in the songs. In the songs all knights are gallant, all maids are beautiful, and the sun is always shining." Lady Catelyn held a stern gaze with Brian for a moment, and Renly felt he should step in. "Lady Catelyn," the king called down. "I feel the need of some air. Will you walk with me?" Catelyn stood at once. "I should be honored." Brian was on her feet as well. "Your Grace, give me but a moment to don my mail. You should not be without protection." King Renly smiled. With every action Brian the Blue made, she reassured the king he had made the right choice, granting her wish for a rainbow cloak. "If I am not safe in the heart of Lord Caswell's castle, with my own host around me, one sword will make no matter, not even your sword, Brian. Sit and eat. If I have need of you, I'll send for you." Brian seemed slightly stricken by Renly's words, but that was not his intention. "As you will, your grace." Brian sat, eyes downcast. Renly took Catelyn's arm and led her from the hall, past a slouching guardsman who straightened so hurriedly that he near dropped his spear. Renly clapped the man on the shoulder and made a jest of it, reassuring his man that his folly was of no matter. "This way, my lady." The king took her through a low door into a stair tower. As they started up, he said, "Perchance, is Sir Barristan Selmy with your son at Riverrun?" Renly had long coveted Sir Barristan to join his Rainbow Guard, but none of his scouts or spies could find him since his dismissal from the Kingsguard, and now that Renly's Rainbow Guard was completed with Brian the Blue, Renly wondered if Sir Barristan the Bold had joined the young wolf's forces, or worse, Stannis's. "No," she answered, puzzled. "Is he no longer with Joffrey?" He was the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. It seemed that the king in the north was not as well informed of the happenings in the south as Renly. Renly shook his head. "The Lannisters told him he was too old and gave his cloak to the Hound. I'm told he left King's Landing vowing to take up service with the true king. That cloak Brian claimed today was the one I was keeping for Selmy, in hopes that he might offer me his sword. When he did not turn up at Highgarden, I thought perhaps he had gone to Riverrun instead. We have not seen him. He was old, yes, but a good man still. I hope he has not come to harm. The Lannisters are great fools." But as much as Renly wished no harm upon Sir Barristan, it was his even greater wish that Sir Barristan had not fallen into Stannis' service. They climbed a few more steps. "On the night of Robert's death, I offered your husband 100 swords and urged him to take Joffrey into his power. Had he listened, he would be regent today, and there would have been no need for me to claim the throne. Ned refused you," she said outright. "He had sworn to protect Robert's children," Renly said. "I lacked the strength to act alone, so when Lord Eddard turned me away, I had no choice but to flee. Had I stayed, I knew the Queen would see to it that I did not long outlive my brother." Lady Caitlin did not seem to appreciate Renly's words. I liked your husband well enough, my lady. He was a loyal friend to Robert, I know, but he would not listen and he would not bend. Here, I wish to show you something. They had reached the top of the stairwell. Renly pushed open a wooden door, and they stepped out onto the roof. Lord Caswell's keep was scarcely tall enough to call a tower, but the country was low and flat and Renly could see for leagues in all directions. Wherever he looked, he saw fires. They covered the earth like fallen stars, and like the stars, there was no end to them. It was an encouraging sight for Renly, but tonight it was a sight for Lady Caitlin so that she might look upon Renly's power and see what awaited her son if he did not choose Renly as an ally. Count them if you like, my lady, Renly said quietly. You will still be counting when dawn breaks in the east. How many fires burn around Riverrun tonight, I wonder? A question Renly hoped would disarm Lady Caitlin. Renly knew from what he had heard that Robb Stark's army was spread out. One of Robb's northern lords had challenged Tywine on the Green Fork and then retreated to the Twins. Robb's army at Riverrun had been joined by Riverlords and Vale Knights, and whispers spread of a second host from beyond the wall equal in size to what Robb had led south from Moat Cailin was on its way. Robb Stark may not have had an army to match Renly's at Riverrun, but the combined force of his three kingdoms might be enough to topple Renly's own, but he could not let Lady Caitlin get wise to such anxieties that he had. I'm told your son crossed the neck with 20,000 swords at his back, Renly went on. Now that the Lords of the Trident are with him, perhaps he commands 40,000. If Lady Caitlin was truly as ignorant to her son's war stratagem as she claimed, then perhaps she would take Renly's small number at his word. I have twice that number here, Renly said, and this is only part of my strength. Mace Tyrell remains at Highgarden with another 10,000, I have a strong garrison holding Storm's End, and soon enough the Dornishmen will join me with all their power. And never forget my brother Stannis, who holds Dragonstone and commands the Lords of the Narrow Sea. Renly's mention of Stannis was his greatest bluff. Eventually Lady Stark would hear that Stannis had taken a crown of his own and shifted his faith to the Red God from across the Narrow Sea, but Renly only needed her to believe him long enough to convince her son to fall in line. It would seem that you are the one who has forgotten Stannis, Caitlin said, rather sharply. His claim, you mean? Renly laughed. Let us be blunt, my lady. Stannis would make an appalling king. Nor is he like to become one. Men respect Stannis, even fear him, but precious few have ever loved him. He is still your elder brother. If either of you can be said to have a right to the Iron Throne, it must be Lord Stannis. Renly shrugged. Tell me, what right did my brother Robert ever have to the Iron Throne? He did not wait for an answer. Oh, there was talk of the blood ties between Baratheon and Targaryen, of weddings 100 years past, of second sons and elder daughters. No one but the Maesters care about any of it. Robert won the throne with his warhammer. He swept a hand across the campfires that burned from horizon to horizon. Well, there is my claim, as good as Robert's ever was. If your son supports me as his father supported Robert, he'll not find me ungenerous. I will gladly confirm him in all his lands, titles, and honors. He can rule in Winterfell as he pleases. He can even go on calling himself king in the north if he likes, so long as he bends the knee and does me homage as his overlord, and whatever tribute is paid to him by the Riverlands and the Vale as king must in part be passed along to me. King is only a word, but fealty, loyalty, service, those I must have. And if he will not give them to you, my lord. Renly was not sure how much clearer he could be to the Lady Stark. I mean to be king, my lady, and not of a broken kingdom. I cannot say it plainer than that. 300 years ago, a Stark king knelt to Aegon the dragon, when he saw he could not hope to prevail. That was wisdom. Your son must be wise as well. Once he joins me, this war is good as done. Renly broke off suddenly, distracted. What's this now? The rattle of chains heralded the raising of the portcullis. Down in the yard below, a rider in a winged helm urged his well-lathered horse under the spikes. Summon the king, he called. Renly vaulted up into a crenel. I'm here, sir. Your grace. The rider spurred his mount closer. I came swift as I could. From Storm's End. We are besieged, your grace, Sir Courtenay defies them, but... Renly could not believe such nonsense. But that's not possible. I would have been told if Lord Tywine left Harrenhal. These are no Lannisters, my liege. It's Lord Stannis at your gates. King Stannis, he calls himself now. Chapter 19, The Battle of Oxcross. Chapter text. They sent their wargs to scout the Lannister camp at Oxcross. Jon sent out Ghost, his brother sent out Grey Wind, and all the skin changers in their army sent out their wolves, hounds, and the few birds they had to study their next battlefield. Sir Stafford Lannister's training camp was positioned nearly 3 days' ride from Lannisport. There were no sentries, palisades, ditches or pikes to defend the camp, just a cluster of tents and red cloth pavilions with the Lannister banners fluttering above and the campfire smoke rising to the sky. It was clear Sir Stafford thought himself safe in his own lands and probably expected that he would have received word from the Golden Tooth long before Robb's army reached them. In addition to the banners of the Golden Lion on the bolts of red cloth, banners of other houses of the Westerlands fluttered freely from the spires of the pavilions as well: House Brax, House Crickehall, House Marbrand, House Lefford, House Hugh, House Just and House Vicary, along with several others. The camp was filled with inexperienced recruits, small folk who had never held weapons before, assembling during the day to train with weapons. The pikesmen assembled in rows, learning basic pike attacks, while some knights strutted up and down the columns of men sounding off 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, with the pikesmen changing to a different attack form with every number. The archers spent their days littering the grass and the outer edges of their targets with arrows, many of them twice Bran's age and half as skilled with a bow as he was before his fall. Not far from the Lannister camp, up a shallow hill, was a separate cluster of tents with wagons, hitched horses and campfires around it, but no banners, no affiliations with the Lannister host. The folk at the little outlying camp, both men and women, would sometimes come down to the Lannister camp dressed in long greyish-blue gowns and smocks with white aprons and long gloves and boxes or satchels with them. Other times Lannister soldiers injured in training would be taken up to the camp where they were treated. The camp was quickly identified as a physician's camp and Robb commanded it to be left untouched when the battle commenced. The army set out at midnight when the Lannister camp was fast asleep, and it seemed Vindrana, the goddess of winds and skies, had blessed them, for heavy rain fell upon them, masking the trot of their horses as they crept through the tree line just east of the camp. The army halted deep within the tree line with the camp barely visible through the forest. Jon sat atop his horse by Robb's side amongst the king's battle guard. In the war council before battle, the Great Jon, Tormund, the Bronze Jon and Sir Stephen Free all squabbled for the honor of leading the vanguard, but Robb had a different plan in mind. Instead of a vanguard of men he would send forth a vanguard of beasts. As the mounted army waited in the dark of the forest, Ghost and Grey Wind led the vanguard as the wargs sent forth their wolves and hounds. The horses of the Lannister cavalry were hitched to posts along the edge of the tree line, with some guards chatting and drinking while they watched over the horses. Jon heard the signal to attack, not from a war horn or a cry from Robb, but instead from the screams of Lannister men being mauled by dire wolves and the stampede of horses being driven into the Lannister camp by wolves and dogs nipping at their heels and snapping their hitching ropes free with their teeth. The horses went wild, trampling through tents and men and causing chaos throughout the camp. As the Lannisters awoke and broke into a panic, Robb pulled down the visor of his wolf-molded bassinet, with Jon doing the same with his own. Winterfell! Robb cried as he led the army forward. The king in the north, others cried out as the army thundered forward in a charge, with their war beasts leading the way, jumping atop the Lannister men and tearing them apart. Like at the Whispering Wood and the camps, Jon looked for the closest Lannister soldier he could find so that he might strike him dead. Jon saw a knight ahead of him holding a sword and half-dressed in plate armor and without either of his boots. The knight spotted Jon as he charged forward and readied for an attack. As Jon drew near on horseback, the knight lifted his sword to attack, but Jon struck true and struck first, slaying the knight with one clean slash. Jon's first kill with Longclaw. Since the old Beargear had first gifted Longclaw to him, Jon had spent every day training with the blade, and at long last Jon had slain his first man with it. The White Wolf continued his charge as he rode down the rows of tents, slashing apart men who came stumbling out of their tents wielding their swords, but Jon never struck an unarmed man, for that was not his way. As they got deeper into the camp, the Lannister soldiers they faced put up a better fight, having had more time to prepare for their retaliation against the northern onslaught. Some Lannister men had managed to ready and mount horses from other parts of the camp and faced the northern army from their saddles. Eventually, the night turned from a massacre to an actual battle as the Lannisters led a counter-charge against the northern host, brandishing their swords, axes, pikes and flails. Jon began circling mounted knights and outriders, clashing with them in battle and slaying them with Longclaw. When Jon looked across the battlefield, he saw the Skagasi cavalry charge through the Brax area of the camp with one unicorn carrying an impaled Brax knight on its horn as it charged through the camp, a rather curious irony in Jon's eyes. The warriors from beyond the wall and the Knights of the Vale seemed the most eager in combat as they rushed through the camp to redden their weapons in their first battle. As the battle continued, Jon stayed close to Robb with the rest of the battle guard, slaying their enemies as they came. Jon had lost count of the number of men he'd slain very quickly in the commotion of battle. Eventually, Jon locked swords with another mounted enemy. The two clashed their blades together as their horses circled until eventually Jon struck him dead. When Jon was liberated from the engagement, he found himself separated from Robb and the battle guard in the heat of battle. Jon spotted Robb's banner of the grey direwolf head on the field of white across the camp and pushed on to reunite with his comrades. Between Jon and the battle guard, Jon spotted a knight in gilded armor, his helm feathered in red and his pauldrons adorned with lions. The knight was on foot, chasing after his horse as it galloped away when suddenly Lord Rickard Karstark circled around him and struck him dead with the swing of his sword. Jon rode past and rejoined Robb's battle guard, saluting Lord Rickard for his kill by raising Longclaw. When Jon rejoined his brother and his men, he spotted Sir Stephen Free locked in a sword fight with a knight of House Brax. The Brax knight raised his sword and seemed to have a clean strike at Sir Stephen's arm, but Harold Hardying struck the Brax knight across the neck with his sword as he rode up behind Sir Stephen's opponent. The battle guard raised their swords and cheered Harold, and Sir Stephen saluted his sword in thanks. Winterfell. Robb shouted again, rallying them to press on and continue their attack. They continued on for some time, but while it was not fast, it was undoubtedly a decisive victory by the end of it. It was still dark when the horns of victory sounded and the cheers of the Northmen rang out, and by the time the light first crested the eastern horizon, they were tending to the wounded and rounding up prisoners. By the early morning, Jon accompanied Robb as he walked along the battlefield. Both were stained with dirt and dried blood, their mounts and helms left in the care of 2 footmen. The Lannister camp at Oxcross was no more, just an open grassland of collapsed and burnt tents, scattered weapons, shields and armor, and corpses beyond count. The physicians from the camp on the hill came down after the battle had ended. They came with their mule-driven carts and their kits, boxes and satchels of medical supplies. They were spread out across the battlefield tending to the wounded, both Stark and Lannister, with no distinction as to who they treated. The northern soldiers were stripping the corpses of the slain Lannister men of their weapons, coin purses and boots. Lord Rickard Karstark found the 2 sons of Eddard wandering the battlefield with their direwolves padding beside them. Lord Karstark's beard was speckled with dirt and he carried the golden helm of the horseless knight Jon saw him slay. "A fine victory, your grace. The Westerland host is no more. For every man we lost our enemies lost 10, Lord Karstark declared as he approached, probably exaggerating. Robb had sent the Blackfish with 20 riders to hunt down and kill or capture any fleeing survivors they could find within a mile of Oxcross. "I see you have taken a trophy, my lord," Robb stated, noticing the helm Lord Karstark carried. "The helm of Sir Stafford Lannister, your grace. As his slayer, Tormund says it should be my honor to present you with his helm," Lord Karstark declared, handing the helm to the young wolf. Jon was surprised. He had suspected that the gilded knight he saw chasing his horse was a Lannister, but he would never have thought him the leader of the Oxcross host, nor Tywin Lannister's brother by marriage. "What's going on over there?" asked Robb, pointing across the battlefield. Several lords in Robb's army and members of his battle guard were all circled around Sir Stephen Free, who stood over the kneeling Squire Harold Hardying. Sir Stephen's sword was drawn and his voice muffled by his distance from Jon, Robb and Lord Karstark. Despite not being heard, it was clear what was transpiring. Harold was being knighted. "My boys told me that the young Hardying squire saved Sir Stephen from Sir Rupert Brax, struck him dead. Out of gratitude Sir Stephen asked the Bronze Yeoman permission to knight the lad." Jon recalled watching Harold strike the Brax knight from behind but did not know his name at the time. "Do we have any hostages?" asked Robb. Lord Karstark nodded his head. "Lord Roland Crickehall, Lord Ontario Jast, Sir Limond Vicary, Sir Landry Hugh and a few others. We have a Lannister boy too, Martin." Another Lannister for themselves, Jon thought. With every battle they won, they seemed to collect more and more of Tywin's kinsmen. Which one is Martin? Robb asked, equally lost on the vastness of the Lannister family tree. Sir Kevan's son, twin brother to that Willem lad we captured at the Whispering Wood. Across the field, a great roar of cheers rang out from the gathered nobles and warriors circled around Sir Stephen and the newly knighted Sir Harold Hardying. The Bronze Yone, Lord Karstark's sons, Jon Redfort, Darcy Mormont, Eustace Hunter, Oliver Free and others all crowded around Harold, patting him on the back, and then small Jon Umber lifted him onto his shoulders from behind and paraded him amongst the men. "Your Grace," a voice called out, drawing their attention away from Harold's knighting. A stark man-at-arms carrying a spear and shield approached the king, escorting one of the physicians from the hill camp to the king. The physician was an older man. He had a big bulbous face with copper skin and dark brown eyes, thick curled hair streaked with grey and a bushy beard to match. He was dressed in a long grey smock with a white apron and elbow-length gloves, both splattered and stained with blood and dirt. The foot soldier bowed his head and the physician followed suit, his reddened gloves clasped together shyly. "This man from the physician's camp requests to speak with you," the soldier explained. "Of course," said Robb curiously. "Your Grace," the physician greeted, bowing his head once more. "Jon, Lord Karstark, this is Master Vargo Essimian of Pentos, leader of the physician camp," Robb introduced as he went to shake the blooded hand of the healer. "I did not get the chance to properly thank you for allowing my practitioners and I to aid the wounded," said Master Vargo. "Not at all. Your aid is most welcome for my men and our prisoners. We only do our duty," the physician said graciously. Suddenly Master Vargo's expression became nervous and he cleared his throat. "Your Grace, I am sure you must find it odd to have my physicians provide medical aid to you and your men when our camp is stationed next to what was a Lannister army. I feel I must explain." Robb nodded his head, welcoming Master Vargo to speak his mind. "My practitioners and I are a traveling guild of healers. Our goal for many years has been to recruit skilled and aspiring scholars of healing and study all forms of medicine and provide aid to those in need. In Essos, where we are from, we provided aid to the mercenary companies and the free cities, regardless of sides. We recently chartered a ship from Lys to Old Town, so that we might petition the maesters of your citadel to trade information of healing with us." Robb smiled and nodded his head approvingly. "An admirable goal. Kind of you to say." Alas, the maesters were stubborn and guarded with their knowledge and dismissive of ours. "When we were turned away we had intended to return to Essos, but then news of your war reached Old Town and we decided to stay and provide aid where we could. We bought horses, tents, mules, wagons and extra equipment and took the road to Crackerhall and accompanied Lord Roland and his men here. And provide your aid to our enemies?" Lord Karstark asked cautiously. "And provide aid to all who need it," Master Vargo corrected. "We believed that since Sir Stafford was raising a host to invade the Riverlands, being with his host would be where we could treat the most amount of wounded on both sides of the war." "Well, Sir Stafford's army is no more," Robb declared, looking around the field. "And here in the Westerlands, every castle, town and host of soldiers is an enemy to our army, and if we come into contact with any it will undoubtedly result in battle," Robb declared. "Which is why we would like to now join your host and continue to provide medical aid. Our only condition is that we request the freedom to heal all wounded equally and not be expected to give priority to your men or denied from treating enemy soldiers," Master Vargo explained. "All perfectly reasonable requests. Come, let us talk more about your healers' accommodations within our host," said Robb, leading Master Vargo away with Grey Wind following behind. Jon, Ghost and Lord Karstark stood and watched as the king departed with the physician across the battlefield, talking as they went. "I don't like it," said Lord Karstark, peering at Master Vargo. "Yesterday they were traveling with the Lannisters, tending to their wounds, sitting around their campfires, and now we expect them to join us." Jon shrugged. "I don't think it's about them joining us as much as following us. What better way to find wounded than follow an army?" Lord Karstark winced and shook his head. "I still don't like it," he reaffirmed. Jon and Lord Karstark began to walk along the battlefield with Ghost following behind. "If they provide equal treatment to our enemies, we will wind up with more prisoners. Executing hostages of war without cause is not our way, so we will end up taking them with us. With all our castles and reinforcements on the other side of the mountains, in a few battles, our prisoners might outnumber us soon enough. Lord Carstark's concerns were fair. They were in enemy territory and their only path to reinforcements or castles to store their prisoners was to travel back through the hidden mountain pass into the Riverlands. Perhaps if our stockades get too full we could free the cripples, men who could not rejoin the Lannister forces if released, Jon suggested. Lord Carstark nodded, seeming impressed with the idea. With all the highborn prisoners we have, I think we should reconsider a hostage trade, said Lord Carstark. We already have more hostages than the Lannisters. If we matched them for all our captured allies we would still have more in ourselves. The Lannisters would never give away all their leverage like that, said Jon. I understand that. But at the very least we should ransom a few. As hostages, they are just prisoners in our cells and have more mouths to feed. Meanwhile my son, Haryon, probably rots in a cage in Harrenhal, Lord Carstark declared sternly. Jon now understood Lord Carstark's stance.